What if history's grandest victories were built on the crumbling bones of the most humiliating defeats? Picture this, a knight, decked in armor that glints in the sun, charging valiantly into battle, only to trip over his own sword and land flat on his face, a living embodiment of medieval slapstick. Shakespearean tragedy meets stand-up comedy, and yet, this isn't the stuff of jest, it's history's most cringe-worthy moments, etched in time like a tattoo of shame. Can you hear the echoes of laughter? The snickers of onlookers witnessing defeat in its most absurd form? What do we do when the stakes are high? The banners wave proudly, but the outcome leaves only the bitter taste of embarrassment. Monarchs toppled not by fierce swords but by the sheer weight of their own hubris. Imagine, a king, confident as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, commands his soldiers to charge, only to find the enemy is made up of his own bumbling peasants, accidentally stumbling into the fray. Chaos erupts, laughter rings out, and the once great ruler stands, not as a conqueror, but as a punchline. Who knew that the sound of swords clashing could mask the raucous laughter of fate itself? As you sift through these pages, prepare for tales that defy the very fabric of valor. The Battle of the Golden Spurs? A misstep in communication, and the Knights of Flanders turned into a circus of misfits, trampling over their own for a shot at glory. And what about the infamous Battle of Bannockburn, where Scottish warriors disguised as sheep wreaked havoc, yes, sheep, upending the battlefield with the kind of absurdity usually reserved for a Monty Python sketch? But beneath each laugh lies a piercing question: what does it mean to lose in such spectacular fashion? Each defeat is a mirror reflecting the fragility of pride, the folly of ambition, and the razor's edge between heroism and total farce. It's a grotesque tapestry of blunders where every thread tells a story of misplaced confidence, strategic blunders, and the most unexpected faux pas that turned legends into laughingstocks. Worry not, for this is not merely a catalogue of failures, it's an electrifying glimpse into the human condition. The battlefield is not just a place of death but a stage for the absurdity of existence itself. These moments, draped in dark humor, are time capsules of folly, reminding us that even the most powerful can stumble into the pit of embarrassment. So brace yourself as we strip away the polished veneer of glory to reveal the raw, unvarnished truth of medieval missteps. Each tale unfolds like a fateful roll of the dice, a gamble where the stakes are high, and the laughter of history echoes long after the dust has settled. Will you dare to confront the awkward, the ridiculous, the downright embarrassing? Turn the page, if you dare. The laughter of the ages awaits. The mud was thick beneath my feet, a treacherous mix of rain and blood, the earthy scent rising to meet me, wrapping around me like a shroud. I stood at the edge of chaos, the air heavy, as if time itself had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. In the distance, I could hear the battle drums, a primal heartbeat echoing against the morning fog that clung to the ground like a forgotten ghost. I remember Thomas, his eyes wide with fear, clenching his longbow, fingers trembling. "What if we fail?" he whispered, the words escaping like a prayer, desperate and raw. But before I could answer, the shouts of the French soldiers rose above us, their laughter sharp and cutting, a cruel reminder of the arrogance that dripped from their every breath. They were sure of victory, certain that their numbers would crush us, like a hammer smashing delicate glass. They didn't see us, the ragged band of Englishmen, hearts beating to the rhythm of defiance, our longbows gripped in calloused hands. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a harsh light upon the battlefield. Shadows danced ominously, and the silhouettes of men became monstrous shapes, twisted and contorted by fear and fury. I could see Henry, the king, his face set in grim determination, every inch the warrior, but beneath that armor, I felt his doubt. Would we stand against the tide? The weight of expectation hung over him like a thick fog, suffocating. He glanced back at us, the flicker of vulnerability hidden behind a mask of resolve, and I felt an ache in my chest. We were not just soldiers, we were brothers, bound by blood and shared dreams, each of us a thread in the tapestry of fate. The first arrow sliced through the air, its flight a whisper before the chaos erupted. It struck a French knight, the sound of impact a sickening thud, like a drumbeat heralding doom. I released my bowstring, the snap echoing in my ears, a primal scream of defiance against that laughter, that arrogance. Each arrow I loosed was a prayer, a strike against the belief that they were invincible, a plea for survival in a world that had forgotten mercy. I remember the way the ground shook as the French cavalry charged, a wave of steel and fury, their horses snorting, the men shouting their war cries, believing they were unstoppable. But we were ready. I could see the fear in Thomas's eyes transform into fierce determination. For England, he yelled, a battle roar bursting forth like the sun breaking through dark clouds. A wave of adrenaline surged through me, a fire igniting in my veins as I pulled back the string, aimed, and let fly another arrow, watching it disappear into the chaos. The battle became a blur. The world narrowed down to the rhythm of breath and blood, the stench of sweat and fear overwhelming my senses. I barely felt the mud sliding beneath my feet as time folded in on itself, each moment a jagged shard of pain and clarity. I caught glimpses of my fellow soldiers, faces twisting in primal screams, resolve and terror mingling in a grotesque dance. The laughter of the French turned to gasps of disbelief as we struck them down, our arrows finding their mark, each shot a declaration that we were alive, we were here, and we would not be silenced. But then, amid the chaos, I saw Henry, struck by a French blade, his body collapsing like a wounded bird. The sight of him falling, the crown slipping from his brow, sent a jolt through my heart. No! I cried, my voice lost in the cacophony. In that moment, I felt the weight of every failure, every doubt I had ever harbored. We were not just fighting for land, we were fighting for him, for our king, our hope. The realization crashed over me like a wave, and suddenly, the battle was not just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the soul of our nation. Thomas fell beside me, an arrow buried deep in his shoulder. Keep fighting, he gasped, pain etched across his face, a young man forced to grow old in a heartbeat. I could see the light dimming in his eyes, the flicker of life wavering like a candle in the wind. For England, he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. And there I stood, the echoes of his voice mingling with the cries of the dying, the laughter of the arrogant French now a distant memory, replaced by the raw sound of desperation. I felt a surge of rage building within me, a fire that roared like a tempest. I raised my bow once more, the weight of the world on my shoulders, the faces of my fallen comrades swirling in my mind, a ghostly parade of sacrifice. For Thomas! I shouted, my voice breaking the air like thunder, and I drew back the string, aiming for the heart of the enemy. The arrow flew, a comet tearing through the sky, a symbol of defiance, of hope, of all that we had fought for. Time twisted and turned, the battle a vivid nightmare, a tapestry woven in blood and courage. I saw shadows of the French falter, their arrogance cracking like fragile glass beneath the weight of our determination. They had underestimated us, the underdogs armed with nothing but longbows and an unyielding spirit. And as the tide began to shift, as the soldiers fell and the ground became a graveyard of dreams, I felt the pulse of something greater than fear, a sense of unity, of belonging, the bonds formed in the crucible of war. And yet, amidst the chaos, I could still hear the echoes of laughter, a haunting reminder of the arrogance that had driven them. It twisted my gut, a reminder that even in victory, shadows lingered. The battle would not end here, it would morph, evolve, become something else entirely, a story of resilience written in blood and tears. I remember the scent of rain mingling with the iron tang of blood, the cries of the wounded fading into the distance. I remember the taste of ashes in my mouth, the bitter aftertaste of survival. And as I watched the sun set over the battlefield, casting long shadows that danced and writhed, I understood then, more than ever, that the war was not just against the enemy before us, but against the arrogance that had led us all to this moment, an endless cycle of conflict, a dance between light and dark, where the only certainty was that time would never stop ticking, and the echoes of this battle would linger long after the last arrow had flown. The night hung thick over Ange, a suffocating cloak of darkness punctuated only by the flickering of torches like dying stars. I remember the crackle of wood as flames licked the air, suffusing the camp with a pale, erratic glow. The shadows danced, casting eerie shapes against the walls of hastily erected tents. Fear twisted in the pit of my stomach, a taut string pulled by the tension in the air, not just the threat of the city's defenders, but the very men who fought alongside us. "Look at them," a voice hissed. It was Raymond of Toulouse, his eyes wild, glinting with something unsteady. "They squabble like children while the enemy sharpens their blades." His fists clenched, knuckles white, anger simmering just beneath the surface. He was a man of honor, once a beacon of hope, now a flickering candle on the verge of being snuffed out by doubt. I felt it too, the suffocating weight of despair that seemed to seep into our ranks. The camp was a pressure cooker, every man's mind a boiling pot threatening to spill over. The whispers had begun, the accusations flaring like wildfire. Baldwin's too soft, they said, too lost in dreams of kingship. And in whispers, Godfrey is a lunatic, a dog chasing its tail. I remember standing there, a ghost among men, watching as the fabric of our unity frayed, threads pulled apart by uncertainty and paranoia. Their faces flickered like the shadows, etched with exhaustion and rage. And me? I was a fool, a mere historian caught in a tapestry of rage and despair, scribbling notes in my mind while the world around me crumbled. Tonight we feast, offered one hopeful soul, his laughter a fragile mask, a fragile shield against the madness. But the feast was a hollow affair, meat charred beyond recognition, wine sour enough to curl the tongue. And yet we clung to the ritual, as if garish merriment could chase away the dark clouds gathering over our heads. Raymond's voice broke through the murmur of discontent, slicing through the air like a knife. We have but one goal. One enemy. His words hung heavy in the air, but the men were already too far gone, trapped in their own spirals of doubt. We cannot let this city fall to chaos. We must unite. But unity was a cruel ghost in that dimly lit camp. The men were lost, trying to navigate a maze of blame and fear, grasping at shadows of old alliances that had turned to ash. I could see them, a grotesque chorus of frustration and resentment, men who once shared dreams of chivalry and glory now reduced to mere specters of their former selves. I remember the moment it happened. A shout erupted from the edge of the camp, a voice tinged with panic. They're coming! The word spread like wildfire, igniting a primal fear that sent men scrambling. Confusion reigned as the shadows of the night closed in tighter, a suffocating embrace that promised no salvation. In that chaos, I caught a glimpse of Godfrey of Bouillon, the man who wore his honor like a tattered cloak. His gaze was wild, haunted by the weight of command. I will lead us, he roared, but his voice trembled, and in his eyes I saw the flicker of doubt that echoed within us all. The men surged around him, a horde teetering on the edge of madness, driven by adrenaline and desperation. I remember the moment when swords clashed, steel against steel, an absurd symphony of desperation, a cacophony that filled the air with the stench of sweat and fear. The waves of chaos washed over us, and I stood there, paralyzed, a bemused observer lost in a world that spun wildly out of control. Why does no one listen? I whispered to myself, hoarse from the weight of it all. The night felt alive, an unforgiving beast that devoured our resolve. I could almost hear the ghostly echoes of laughter from earlier, mocking our folly. Desperation coiled around my heart, squeezing tighter with every passing moment. The battlefield was a tapestry of despair, woven with the cries of men fighting shadows. I found myself next to Raymond again, our shoulders brushing against each other. What have we become? He asked, his voice cracking, the facade of strength crumbling away. We were promised glory, but now we cling to broken dreams. Glory, I scoffed, the word bitter on my tongue. Is that what we sought? Or was it just a pretty bauble we chased? The irony ripped through me, a jolt of clarity in the midst of the storm. We were fools, chasing echoes of honor while the world turned to chaos. But just as despair threatened to swallow us whole, a pulse of hope flickered. A cry rang out, a rallying shout that cut through the din for Christ. For our homes. It was Baldwin, his voice a beacon piercing the darkness, igniting a flicker of resolve. The men surged forward, a tide of humanity propelled by something deeper than fear, fueled by the remnants of brotherhood. I was swept up in the swell, my heart pounding in sync with the rhythm of battle. We were united, if only for a moment, fighting not just for Ange, but for each other, for the fragile threads that still connected us in this tempest of chaos. And in that fleeting moment of unity, I saw the truth, a haunting realization that we were all broken, flawed men, clinging together like shards of glass, and yet still capable of reflecting light. But the light flickered, dimmed by the shadows that clung ever closer, and I feared it would not last. The clash of steel was all-consuming, drowning out the whispers of dissent, but I knew it was only a temporary balm. We were still a storm, a brewing tempest of emotions, swirling, colliding, always on the brink of implosion. Every heartbeat echoed, every breath hung heavy with anticipation. I remember the haunting spectre of failure looming over us, a reminder that victory is never guaranteed. The shadows danced, whispering promises of glory while concealing the bitter truth that lay just beyond the flickering light of our torches. As the battle raged on, I clung to the fleeting hope that we could rise from the ashes of our own making. But in the darkest corners of my heart, a fear lodged itself, a fear that whispered of betrayal, of division, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to strike when we were at our weakest. And so we fought on, not just against the city's walls, but against the ghosts of our own making, lost in the throes of a night that promised to change us forever. The air crackled with tension, thick as the morning mist clung to the ground, shrouding the battlefield of Bannockburn in a veil of uncertainty. The clanking of armor echoed like a mournful dirge, and the scent of damp earth filled the nostrils. Each man stood, heart racing, pulse pounding, waiting for the inevitable clash. I remember the way the dawn light broke, an unsettling omen, illuminating the faces of those prepared for glory or oblivion. "Today is ours," Robert, a wild-eyed warrior, bellowed, his voice trembling with fervor. His name was James, a man of fire and fury, his very spirit ablaze against the dark. He gripped his sword, knuckles white, staring at the glimmering English army in the distance. His confidence, a double-edged sword, danced dangerously close to arrogance. I could see it in his eyes, a hunger for victory that edged on madness. But beneath that bravado lay a gnawing fear, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this was a fool's errand. "Fear not, James," Robert the Bruce replied, his voice steady, echoing like the heartbeat of Scotland itself. The king's gaze swept over his men, lingering on each face, each soul willing to sacrifice everything for a dream that felt almost too fragile to breathe. "We fight for our land, for our freedom. Let that be our strength." But even his words held a tremor, a hint of doubt that clawed at my insides. I was not a soldier, I was a chronicler of stories, and yet here I was, ensnared by the weight of their hopes. Then came the silence, a chilling calm that wrapped around us like a noose, the kind that foreshadows an impending storm. They say the soul understands what the heart fears. I could sense it, the ghosts of warriors past whispering through the trees, warning of overstretched ambition. But how could I voice that? How could I reveal that the very air carried the scent of impending ruin? The clash of steel erupted, shattering the stillness, an orchestra of chaos that surged through my veins. The battlefield transformed into a hellscape, where valor danced with despair. I watched as James charged forward, the very embodiment of defiance, yet I could see the shadows creeping in. Moments before, he had been a lion, now he was a man among ghosts, fighting not just the enemy but the crushing weight of his own overconfidence. "Look," he shouted, hacking at an English soldier, blood spraying like paint upon a canvas of mud. "We will carve our names into history." But with every swing, every desperate lunge, the spectre of doubt gnawed deeper. I saw the flicker of uncertainty cross his face, the realization that glory is a fickle mistress, often dancing just beyond reach. Robert fought beside him, a titan among men, yet even he felt the burden of leadership. I could see it, the glint of doubt in his eyes mirrored in the wild fervor of his men. They surged forward, spurred by adrenaline, but I could feel the echoes of old battles, the specters of defeat weaving a tapestry of despair just beneath the surface. "Hold the line," he roared, a desperate cry that resonated like thunder, but the ground beneath him felt tremorous, shifting with the weight of their overconfidence. "Do you feel it?" I heard one soldier mutter, his voice low and trembling as he parried a blow. "The weight of our pride." Panic flickered in his eyes, a reflection of his fear, and I wondered if the others felt it too. That insidious belief that they could defy the odds, that they had already won before the first sword had been drawn. Was this strength or mere folly? The battle surged and ebbed like a tide, a grotesque dance of life and death. I watched as men fell, their dreams extinguished in moments, hopes turned to ash. The cries of the wounded pierced the air, a haunting symphony that echoed long after the clamor of swords faded. And in that cacophony, I caught sight of James again, panting, blooded yet unbowed, but I could see the flicker of despair in his stance, a fracture in his armor of confidence. He was a warrior, yes, but he was also a man grappling with the unbearable weight of expectation. "Robert," he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. "We cannot lose. We must not." But the king's face, once steadfast, began to wear the mask of uncertainty, and in that moment, I sensed the tremors of fate shifting beneath our feet. A chill ran down my spine, an icy hand gripping my heart. Could they feel it? The universe tilting, the scales of destiny swaying precariously? And then, in the midst of the chaos, came a moment of clarity, a fleeting vision of the cosmos, of stars spinning silently overhead while the world below erupted in violence. I remembered my own dreams of valor, of painting tales of heroism, but now the canvas felt tainted, smeared with the blood of ambition. Is this what we sought? I wondered, watching men who once stood proud, now lost in the tide of battle, their fates tangled in the very fabric of their choices. Then came the turning point, the shattering realization: overconfidence is a beast that devours its own. I could see it in Robert as he hesitated, the weight of his decisions crashing down. The shadows of their pride loomed larger with each passing moment, smothering the flickers of hope that once burned bright. The cries of the fallen filled my ears, and in their silence, I felt the gravity of our choices, the fragility of dreams held hostage by the cruel hands of fate. "James!" Robert shouted, his voice rising above the chaos, yet tinged with desperation. "We fight not just for victory, but for survival." But as he spoke, I could sense the breaking of spirits around them, the dawning realization that glory can sometimes be a mask, concealing the grotesque truth of human folly. I stood there, a witness to their struggles, and felt the weight of their ambition shifting like the very ground beneath them. The clash of steel became a desperate symphony of emotions: fear, hope, despair, and the haunting question of what it means to fight for something greater than oneself. Would they emerge from this battle not as victors but as a lesson etched in the annals of history? I didn't know. The battle raged on, an intricate ballet of life and death, the tension spiraling ever higher. I could feel it, the weight of their overconfidence crushing down, the relentless tide of fate drawing closer. Would they rise from this moment, or would they drown beneath the shadows of their ambitions? The universe held its breath, watching, waiting, as time slipped through their fingers like grains of sand. And I, caught in the whirlwind of emotions, was powerless to look away. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and despair, a bitter reminder that the once mighty walls of Constantinople trembled under the relentless assault of time and fate. I remember the sound, the low, ominous thud of cannon fire echoing through the streets, a heart-stopping drumbeat signaling the end of an era. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows as if even it hesitated to witness the horrors below. Every crack of stone splitting, every scream of the wounded melded into a symphony of chaos, an orchestra of despair that swallowed the city whole. And there stood Alexios, his heart pounding like the war drums of the Ottomans. A soldier, yes, but a reluctant one. He felt the weight of his armor, heavy as the legacy of 1,000 years, suffocating him. "What have we done?" he whispered to no one, the question echoing back like a ghost. Time had slipped through his fingers like sand, and now he faced the monstrous reality of betrayal, the betrayal of leaders who had chosen pride over reason, and faith over strategy. He had trained for battle, for glory, not for a death sentence. Fear clawed at his insides, it gnawed on his will, sharp like the edge of a blade. In another corner of the city, Helena paced the stone halls of her father's palace, her heart a tempest of fear and bitterness. "I remember," she muttered, "the nights when the stars seemed to whisper promises of safety." Now, they felt like taunts, winking at her from the heavens while chaos unfurled below. She clutched the pendant around her neck, a simple piece, yet imbued with the weight of her lineage, a token of hope in these dark hours. The whispers of her childhood, of knights and heroes, felt like cruel jokes now. Where were the saviors? Where were the legends? The shadows of her father loomed over her, an emperor caught in a web of indecision and cowardice. "Father, if only you had listened to the cries of the people, to the warnings of the prophets." Her voice cracked, a fragile sound amidst the cacophony. Each moment spent in indecision felt like a betrayal, not just to the city, but to every citizen who believed in the promise of a better tomorrow. She was not merely a princess, she was a woman forged in the fires of despair, yearning for something more than a gilded cage. And amid it all, there was Constantine, the last vestige of the Byzantine Empire, a man burdened by the ghosts of his ancestors. He stood on the ramparts, gazing out over the horizon where the enemy gathered like a storm, dark, powerful, unyielding. I remember the days when hope was as vast as the sea, he grumbled, more to himself than to anyone else. The weight of history pressed down upon him, a suffocating cloak of expectation. Is this the end? The question gnawed at him, hollowing him out, leaving only a shell of a man who once believed he could protect his people. The cannons roared again, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. Each blast felt like a heartbeat, growing weaker, echoing. His people were counting on him, but fear clawed at his throat, choking the words he desperately wished to say. Hold fast, he wanted to shout, but all that came out was a choked whisper. Would they listen? Would they follow him into the jaws of death? The Ottomans moved like shadows, relentless and unyielding, each step they took echoed with the promise of nightfall. They were a tidal wave, crashing against the city's ancient stones. The once proud towers, a testament to centuries of resilience, now loomed like tombstones over the graves of hope. They will breach the walls, Alexios thought, dread pooling in his stomach like poison. What will become of us? What will we become? The night descended, thick and oppressive, wrapping around the city like a funeral shroud. Helena found herself standing among the bodies, the remnants of life scattered like fallen leaves, each one a story cut short, each one a dream lost. I remember laughter, dancing, love, she murmured, her voice breaking the silence like glass shattering. Now only silence surrounds me. The faces of her loved ones danced in her mind, memories like ghosts begging for acknowledgement. Then came the scream, the piercing, chilling sound that slashed through her heart, calling her back to the present. Alexios was fighting, battling against his own demons as much as against the foe before him. He swung his sword, the steel glinting in the torchlight, and for a moment, he felt invincible. But then, another body fell, another soul extinguished. What have we become? He cried, voice raw, eyes wide with terror. We were once a proud people. Together, we fight. Constantine's voice rang out over the tumult, but it felt hollow, as if the very air laughed at him. His words struggled to find purchase amid the despair. With every second, the weight of his failures pressed down on him, suffocating. He had promised safety, yet here they stood, teetering on the precipice of annihilation. In that moment, time stretched, an eternity filled with the echoes of the past and the harbingers of doom. Every heartbeat was a reminder of their collective failures, their choices echoing through the ages. We cannot falter, we must endure, Helena thought, clenching her fists, fighting against the tide of hopelessness that threatened to drown her. And yet, deep inside, she wondered, was endurance enough? The final clash came with a fury that sent shockwaves rippling through the very fabric of existence. The walls of Constantinople trembled under the onslaught, a grandiose relic fighting its last battle. Shadows danced in the firelight, revealing the stark truth, they were all but pawns in a game far larger than themselves. Alexios felt the hot breath of fear on his neck while Constantine's anguished gaze swept over the city, a city that had sheltered them, nurtured them, now on the brink of ruin. In that moment of convergence, as swords clashed and screams filled the air, hope flickered like a dying candle. And with it, the realization struck hard, the fall of Constantinople was not just the collapse of a city, it was the collapse of dreams, of identities, of souls woven into a tapestry now torn apart. The night loomed ever closer, swallowing the last remnants of light, a dark promise of what was to come. Each of them stood on the edge, staring into the abyss, a world unraveling beneath their feet, waiting for the inevitable plunge. The air crackled with the scent of sweat and fear, an invisible fog hanging over the battlefield as if the world itself held its breath. It was a moment suspended in time, a heartbeat caught in the throes of fate. The sun had dipped low, bleeding golden hues across the horizon, but all that glimmered was the promise of death. I stood among the throngs, heart pounding like a war drum, my hands trembling with the weight of a pitchfork, a simple tool turned weapon in the face of towering knights clad in steel. I remember the way the ground felt, the cool earth beneath my worn boots. I remember the faces of my comrades, twisted by desperation, by a hope that fluttered like a caged bird. Lucien, a farmer with a heart as big as his calloused hands, stood beside me, his eyes wide, reflecting both terror and a fierce determination. He had lost his daughter to the noble's whims, a casualty of an unseen war fought in castles and courts, and now his grief sought vengeance in the form of rebellion. "They think we're nothing," he spat, his voice a low growl as he gripped his spear tight. "Let's show them what nothing can do." And then there was Elodie, a fierce spirit in a world that sought to crush her. She donned her late brother's armor, a mismatched set that clinked awkwardly against her frame. In the shadows of our impromptu army, she fought not just for survival but for freedom, for dignity. The fire in her eyes flickered like the torches lining the makeshift camp, illuminating her resolve. "We stand or we fall together," she declared, rallying those around her, her voice a piercing arrow of hope that cut through the encroaching darkness. "Remember who we are." But just as easily, doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. I glanced at the knights on the ridge, their polished armor glinting ominously in the fading light, a wall of terror, of privilege, poised to descend upon us. I could almost hear the whispers of the ghosts of our ancestors, urging us to rise, to fight, to remember the blood that stained the very soil we stood upon. The weight of our past clung to us like a shroud, heavy with the years of oppression and silence. Courage is a fickle friend. One moment, it surged through me like wildfire, and in the next, it flickered like a dying flame. I thought of my mother, her hands stained with dirt, her laughter echoing through our small home as she recounted tales of heroes and battles long lost. What if we fail? I wanted to shout into the night, to rip the mask off this resolute facade. But I held my tongue, the weight pressing against my chest, as if the very air sought to suffocate our uprising. The battle began with a cacophony, a clash of steel and the guttural sounds of men caught between life and death. The knights charged down the hill, a tidal wave of metal and malice. I felt the ground shudder beneath their weight, like a living creature protesting the violence about to unfold. My heart raced as I thrust my pitchfork forward, adrenaline coursing through me, a primal scream rising from the depths of my soul. We were outnumbered, but here, on this cursed field, we were united. Lucien's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "For the fallen," he roared, and I saw the fire ignite within our ranks, a wave of humanity fueled by loss and longing. We surged forward, our makeshift weapons raised high, defiance etched into our very beings. In that moment, we were not peasants, we were warriors, shadows of giants, clawing for a spark of hope against the relentless darkness. Elodie danced through the fray, her movements fluid and fierce, a wild spirit unchained. She struck down one knight, then another, her laughter intertwining with the screams of the dying, a macabre symphony that drove us onward. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of rage and joy, and I envied her. I wanted to be like her, to laugh amidst the chaos, to embrace the madness of it all. But as the tide of battle swayed, I felt the chill of fear creeping back, curling around my spine like a serpent. The knights were relentless, their armor glinting, imposing. I remembered the tales of valor, of gallant knights who could fell 100 men with a single swing. I could hardly hold my own against the weight of my pitchfork, and for a moment, I faltered, questioning the strength of my resolve. The ghosts of our ancestors whispered dark tales of futility and despair, their voices mingling with the cries of the fallen. Then I saw Lucien again, a beacon in the storm. He was struggling, grappling with a knight whose sword sparkled with malevolent intent. Time slowed as I watched, the world narrowing to that single moment. I remembered the softness of his hands, the way he comforted others even when his own heart was breaking. I couldn't let him fall. With a scream that erupted from deep within me, I lunged forward, the pitchfork becoming an extension of my will. I struck true, and the knight stumbled, shock painting his features as Lucien seized the opportunity, driving his spear into the chink of armor. We cried out, a chorus of triumph mingled with the horror of what we'd done. I saw the flicker of life leave the knight's eyes, and a part of me recoiled. This was war, and yet, it felt like betrayal of our very humanity. But here we were, on this field of shadows and blood, fighting for our ghosts, for the lives lived and lost, for the dreams that had been crushed under the weight of greed. The battle raged on, a tempest of chaos and clashing wheels, and amidst it all, I felt the tide turning. It was a slow realization, creeping upon me like the dawn breaking after a long night. We were more than mere peasants, we were the fury of the forgotten, the wrath of the silenced. And as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting our world into darkness, we fought on. We fought for every cry, every mournful echo of those who had come before us. We fought not just to survive but to be remembered, to carve our names into the annals of history, one golden spur at a time. The battle was no longer about us, it was a testament to our existence, a symphony of rebellion. The cries of victory mingled with the sobs of sorrow, a haunting melody that would never truly fade. In the heart of that chaos, amidst the shadows and the blood, I realized we were all interconnected, woven into the very fabric of time, each life a thread, each death a reminder of the fragility of our dreams. As the darkness enveloped us, I felt a shift deep within, a recognition that the battle for our identity was only just beginning. This was a moment, yes, but it was also a doorway into the vast unknown, a path leading us forward into the haunting echoes of history, forever entwined with the ghosts of the past. And we continued to fight, not just for today, but for a tomorrow that shimmered with the promise of possibility, waiting to be seized. The sun hung low in the sky, a molten ball of fury ready to plunge into an abyss of blood and ash. The air crackled, thick with the scent of sweat and fear, mingling with the metallic tang of impending doom. In the parched valley outside Tiberias, soldiers shifted restlessly, their eyes darting over the horizon, where shadows crept like phantoms. A hush fell over the camp, heavy and drenched with anticipation, as if the earth itself held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. This was the last moment of calm before chaos engulfed them, before Saladin's relentless army descended like a pack of wolves. 20 paces! Sir Reynold shouted, his voice a jagged knife cutting through the silence. He stood tall, his armor glinting, a lion poised to roar. But inside, a tempest raged. We will not cower. We will not retreat. His bravado echoed, but it felt hollow, like a promise made to a ghost. He had gambled everything, staked his honor on a desperate plan, and now, as the sun blazed overhead, it was painfully clear that the dice had rolled against him. I remember how desperation clung to him, a second skin, how he paced like a caged beast, eyes flickering to the men around him. They were not merely soldiers, they were fathers, brothers, and sons. Each heartbeat a reminder of what hung in the balance, and yet Sir Reynold had always grasped at glory, blindly marching toward the precipice. His ambition was a fire, consuming him from within, and as he tightened his grip around the hilt of his sword, I could see the shadows of doubt flickering in his gaze. Then there was the young squire, Thomas, whose hands trembled as he tied his master's armor. I could feel his fear, a palpable thing, wrapping around us like the heat that shimmered above the ground. He was but a boy, barely old enough to grow a beard, and yet here he was, thrust into a nightmare. I watched him swallow hard, his wide eyes darting from Sir Reynold to the horizon, where the black banners of Saladin's army waved like the end of an era. In that moment, I could see every dream he had, every hope of home, shattering like delicate glass. Will we win? Thomas whispered, voice barely a breath, hope hanging by a thread. He looked up at Sir Reynold, searching for reassurance. But what could one man promise in the face of such overwhelming darkness? In the silence that followed, I watched Sir Reynold's facade crack just a little. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Just the sound of the wind, a mournful wail that seemed to mock them. We fight for Christ, he finally declared, though even he could hear the tremor beneath the weight of those words. The faith that had once burned bright within him flickered, dimmed by uncertainty. The clash of metal rang out like a death knell, slicing through the moment. From afar, the distant rumble of hooves echoed, a relentless tide that surged closer, each beat of the drums quickening the pulse of fear. On the battlefield, soldiers moved like marionettes, strings pulled taut by the hands of fate. The air thickened with the cries of men, the desperate screams blending with the dry rustle of dust. I felt the world tilt, the ground shifting beneath my feet as reality blurred with nightmare. And then, I saw her, Isabella, the fierce woman who had always stood at the periphery of this male-dominated arena, a spark in the shadow of giants. She rode like a tempest, eyes fierce and determined, bathed in the golden light of the dying sun. Her heart beat quick in her chest, a war drum that urged her forward. I could see her face, a mask of defiance, and yet beneath it lay a storm of anguish, the burden of her own choices heavy upon her. "Ride with me," she called, her voice slicing through the din, each syllable a command, a plea to the men who would follow her into the abyss. They looked to her with eyes wide, as if she were some spectre conjured from their dreams. The women had been cast aside in this brutal male theatre, and yet here she was, a fierce blade among dull swords, daring them to follow her into the fray. But what haunted her most were the echoes of doubt that bled through the cracks of her resolve. What if they fell? What if these men she inspired to fight, to die for a cause, were slaughtered in her name? The weight of leadership sat heavy, a mantle woven from threads of courage and fear, and in that moment, I felt her pain deep within. The sun sank further, spilling its molten glow over the horizon, colors bleeding into one another like the battlefield soon would. The cries of men blended with the groans of horses, the stench of sweat and blood curling into the air like a grotesque perfume. Sir Reynold, Thomas, and Isabella, tethered together by fate, stood at the precipice of destiny, each heartbeat echoing the inevitable clash. They were actors in a tragedy, unaware that the curtain would soon fall, and that what followed would be written not in the annals of glory but in the cold whispers of defeat. The riders of Saladin surged forward, a relentless wave of darkness, and as the first clash rang out, metal against metal, fury against fury, I felt something shift. Fear gnawed at the very edges of hope, and in that moment, I understood that this was not merely a battle for land, it was a battle for souls. Time slowed, and the world around me blurred. I remember the screams, the blood, hot and visceral, as it stained the earth. I remember the sun, now a witness to their demise, casting long shadows over the battlefield. I remember the whispers of despair, mingled with the cries of courage, and I remember the hearts that shattered under the weight of destiny. It was here, in the chaos, beneath the furious sky, that all would change, yet none would be saved. The world held its breath, and in that silence, the truth loomed larger than any fear. The Battle of Hattin was not just a clash of armies, it was the embodiment of human struggle, the eternal dance between hope and despair, played out once again under the watchful gaze of the cosmos, and the end was only the beginning. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning wood, mingling with the sweat and fear that clung to the peasants like a second skin. I remember the wail of a child somewhere in the distance, a haunting melody that pierced through the howling wind. The sun hung low, a blood-red orb, casting long shadows that danced around the ragged figures gathered in the square. They were a sea of faces, twisted with desperation and anger, eyes alight with a wild, defiant fire that could not be extinguished. I remember watching from the edge, my heart pounding like a war drum. There was John, a hulking giant of a man with calloused hands that had tilled the soil too long, his dreams buried beneath the weight of fields that offered nothing but despair. And there was Alice, her delicate frame shivering in the chill of the evening air, yet her spirit was unyielding, a flicker of hope against the encroaching darkness. They had come together, drawn by a common thread of suffering, each one a stitch in the tapestry of rebellion. I felt the pull between them, a magnetic force that whispered promises of love and freedom amid the chaos. Enough! John's voice thundered through the gathering, a clarion call that demanded attention. It was a voice forged in years of toil, of watching the Lord's men steal what little they had left. The crowd surged forward, a living, breathing entity, fueled by the raw emotion that coursed through their veins. Hatred, fear, desperation, their hearts beat in unison. We fight for our children. For a future. No more chains. Each word fell like a stone cast into a still pond, causing ripples that spread outward, igniting a firestorm of resolve. But what lies beneath that resolve? I saw it in Alice's trembling fingers as they gripped the edge of her tattered dress, the threadbare fabric a testament to her struggle. She had lost a brother to the plague, another to starvation, her laughter now was a ghost echoing through empty halls. They will come for us, she whispered to John, her voice a silken thread weaving fear into the fabric of hope. They will come with swords and fire. And yet, as the crowd chanted for justice, for vengeance, I was struck by the absurdity of their plight. Clocks ticked away moments they could not reclaim, each second a cruel reminder of what had been lost. I imagined the wealthy lords feasting in their opulent halls, their laughter echoing above the din of the starving masses below. They bathed once a year, and who knows, perhaps romance was earthy, but they had no idea of the depths of despair that clung to the souls of the downtrodden. I remember John's eyes, fierce but shadowed by doubt. He was a man caught between love and anger, a burning desire to protect Alice and the other children who watched with wide, fearful eyes. "Will our fight mean anything?" he asked, the words tumbling from his lips like stones thrown into a vast abyss. "Will they ever hear us?" The fire in his chest flickered, threatened to extinguish, but the crowd pressed him onward. "Aye. They will hear us." The roar of voices was a tempest, a raging storm that enveloped us all. They were not just peasants, they were fathers and mothers, dreamers and lovers, each one clinging to the hope that this moment would change everything. I felt that hope thrumming through me, like a heartbeat, but I also felt the coldness of despair lurking just behind. What if the shadows won? A bell tolled in the distance, a mournful sound that knotted our stomachs. I could see the flicker of torches in the darkening twilight, a ghastly parade of armored men marching toward us like grim reapers, their cold steel glinting with the promise of violence. Alice's breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide and glistening, and I longed to pull her close, to shield her from the horror that was coming. "Stay with me," John urged her, his grip tightening around her wrist, a lifeline thrown into turbulent seas. "Do you think they care?" she spat back, defiance mingling with fear. "They'll crush us like ants." Her voice rose above the din, raw and unfiltered, an unyielding truth that cut through the air, sharp as any blade. I could see her shaking, yet her spirit was a fire that refused to die. Here was a woman who had lost so much yet stood firm, a beacon in the gathering storm. The clash came suddenly, a violent surge that swept through the crowd like wildfire. I felt the collective heart of the peasants shatter as the first sword was drawn, a flash of steel that glimmered ominously in the twilight. Shouts of terror morphed into cries for justice, and chaos erupted. I felt the ground tremble beneath us, a heartbeat of its own, as if the earth itself wept for the lost dreams and shattered lives caught in that moment. "Fight! Fight for what is ours!" John bellowed, but the weight of despair hung heavy upon him, upon all of us. I watched as he charged forward, a titan among the faltering souls, driven by love and fury. But was it enough? Would it ever be enough? And then, in that cacophony of chaos, I saw Alice's eyes. They were not just filled with fear, they held determination, a fierce glow that ignited the darkest corners of my heart. "I will not be forgotten," she cried, an echo rising above the clamor, a haunting melody that would linger long after the last sword fell silent. In the swirl of bodies and the clash of steel, I was trapped in that moment, a witness to the rise of the lower class, and yet, the fall was imminent, a shadow looming over their victory. Each heartbeat echoed with a promise unfulfilled, a tapestry of dreams unraveling with every swing of a sword. And there I stood, heart racing, breath caught in my throat, knowing deep within that this was just the beginning. The night held many secrets, and as the clock chimed ominously, I felt the weight of history pressing down like a fog, thick and suffocating. Would these souls rise as phoenixes from the ashes, or would they be mere whispers in the annals of time? A moment suspended in eternity, a silence before the storm. I remember. The tide was turning, and the darkness was upon us. A war trumpet blares, piercing the crisp morning air, and in that terrifying moment, the silence shatters like glass. The sun hangs low, a fiery orb straining against the horizon, while the dusty plains of Nicopolis tremble beneath the weight of destiny. Men stand shoulder to shoulder, ironclad and proud, their armor glinting like the eyes of hungry wolves. I can smell the sweat, the fear, and the metallic tang of anticipation, the scent of impending doom. Hugo, a knight with a chiseled jaw and a heart teetering on the edge of bravado and dread, grips his sword so tightly that his knuckles whiten. "Today will be our triumph," he insists, his voice a fragile thread laced with doubt. Yet there's a flicker in his eyes, a storm brewing amidst the bravado. He remembers the ghosts of battles past, ghosts that whisper of glory, yes, but also of death. He looks over at Alda, a fierce warrior woman whose spirit is a blazing fire against the encroaching twilight. Alda's brow is furrowed, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the Ottoman forces wait, like shadows poised to engulf the light. "Overconfidence is a knife," she mutters, her voice barely above a whisper, but it cuts through the thick air. "It can bury itself in your back before you've even drawn your sword." Around her neck hangs a simple locket, a token of a life she left behind, a memory of laughter that now feels like a prison. The weight of her past pulls at her heart. The knights cheer, their voices echoing against the sky, a cacophony of misplaced valor. To victory, they bellow. But Alda knows, she knows that victory is as ephemeral as the morning mist. The Ottoman army, a tide of dark figures, swells like a storm, their banners snapping in the wind, each gust a foretell of the chaos to come. And then there is Luca, a squire barely old enough to clutch a sword, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and misguided heroism. He watches the knights around him, their laughter and bravado intoxicating him. He yearns to be like them, to feel the rush of glory, but beneath his chest beats a heart soaked in dread. I remember my mother's voice, he thinks, a mantra in his mind. Courage, my son. Courage. But courage feels like a distant echo in the face of reality, a fragile bubble about to burst. As the battle cries rise, the sky darkens with the weight of fate. The Ottomans advance, their movement smooth, calculated, a living tide that threatens to consume all that is in its path. The clanking of armor melts with the deafening roar of war, a symphony composed of despair and ferocity. Hugo takes a step forward, spurred by a sudden rush of adrenaline, but a voice within him trembles, a warning. What if this is our last stand? He turns to Alda, seeking reassurance, but finds her gaze fixed on the enemy, a storm of determination on her face. We fight for our glory, yes? For honor, she replies, though the question hangs heavy, almost mocking. But we must not let pride blind us. We are not invincible. The unspoken fear between them wraps tight, a bond formed not just by camaraderie but by the fear of what looms ahead. The clash erupts, swords meet swords with a sound like thunder. Bodies collide, and the ground shakes beneath a deluge of men. In that moment, chaos reigns, screams mingling with shouts of valor, the air thick with the acrid scent of sweat, blood, and fear. It's a primal dance of death, and as I stand amidst it, I feel the chill of reality seep into my bones. Hugo lunges, the adrenaline blinding him momentarily. He strikes a blow, feeling the warm spray as the blade finds its mark. But with each victory, guilt gnaws at him. I remember, he whispers to himself, a time before swords, before blood. A time of dreams. But dreams feel distant here, lost in the cacophony of war. His laughter has been silenced, replaced with the hollow sound of survival. Alda fights like a tempest unleashed, her movements a mixture of grace and savagery. But every face she cuts down pulls at her soul, a weight she can't shake. This is not what I wanted, she thinks, not what I dreamed of. She remembers the fields of her youth, vibrant and alive, and now they are stained with the ashes of men. Luca, overwhelmed by the frenzy, finds himself lost in the melee. He swings his sword, but the grip falters, fear clawing at his throat. Courage, he chants, a desperate prayer. But in the eye of the storm, courage feels like a cruel joke. He watches as knights fall around him, the sound of their bodies hitting the ground echoing like a funeral dirge. Each death is a nail in his heart, each body a reminder of the grim reality he cannot escape. And then, in a heartbeat, everything changes. A surge of Ottoman warriors crashes against them, a wave of dark fury that overwhelms. The tide turns. Hugo feels the ground beneath his feet shift, the laughter of his comrades replaced by screams. No. This can't be, he yells into the void, but the void answers only with a silence heavy with loss. Alda, fighting for breath now, feels the world constrict around her. We were fools, she realizes, a bitter taste on her tongue. Fools blinded by our own hubris. With every swing, her strength wanes, her vision blurring as the shadows of her comrades fall. Luca fights not for glory but for survival, every movement echoing with fear. I remember, he whispers, clutching to the fading memory of home, of laughter, of warmth. But the warmth has turned to ice, and with every swing of his sword, he feels something inside him shatter. The battlefield stretches on, a theater of chaos. The sun dips low, casting long shadows that seem to stretch toward the horizon, gaping mouths waiting to swallow them whole. Victory fades away like a mirage, and the reality is stark, they are not the heroes of this tale but mere footnotes in a history written by the blood of the vanquished. As the last cries mingle with the fading light, a heavy realization sinks like lead in the chests of Hugo, Alda, and Luca. They stood together, once proud and fierce, but now, in the grip of despair, they are just survivors clinging to the remnants of what was, haunted by the ghosts of their own making. As the sun sets, the echoes of Nicopolis linger in the air, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall, and in their fall, the true battle awaits. A storm hung over Acre, thick and black, as if the very heavens mourned the folly that had brought us to this moment. I remember the taste of desperation on my tongue, like iron mixed with salt water, heavy and bitter. The city's walls trembled under the weight of our mistakes, crumbling stones whispering tales of blood and betrayal. The air was electric, charged with a tension that crackled like the fires igniting in the distance. I stood amidst the chaos, my heart thrumming loudly, drowning out the cries of men and the roars of the waves crashing against the fortifications. A figure broke through the murk, his silhouette stark against the flickering flames, Baldwin, my cousin, my hope. He was a lion-hearted knight, fierce and proud, but today, his armor was tarnished, not from battle, but from the burden of decisions that gnawed at him like a relentless pest. I could see it in his eyes, the haunted look that told me the weight of our past was suffocating him. "We must hold," he said, voice caught somewhere between a plea and a command, as if uttering the words could conjure the strength we needed. But I could feel it, the certainty that our time was slipping away like sand through our fingers. Around us, the remnants of our forces shifted uneasily, shadows of men who had once charged into battle with fervor but now stood frozen, ravaged by doubt. The siege had dragged on, days blurring into nights, each sunrise a cruel reminder of our dwindling supplies and morale. I could hear them whispering, voices rising and falling like the tide, speaking of surrender, of retreat. "What will it matter?" one said, voice trembling with despair. "We will die here, fighting for what? A memory." And then there was Anna. Sweet Anna, who had been my solace amidst the horror. She was not a knight or a warrior, her strength was woven into her spirit, a flame that flickered defiantly against the shadows. We had shared laughter under the starlit sky, dreams of a future far from this chaos. I remember her fingers brushing against mine as she bandaged my wounds, her touch a balm in the midst of the storm. But now, her eyes shone with unshed tears, reflecting the firelight, a mirror of all we had lost. "Do you think they will remember us?" she asked, voice trembling like a leaf caught in the wind. "When this is over?" At that moment, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. Would they remember? Would they remember the faces of the fallen, the cries for mercy that echoed through the night? Or would we be swallowed by the tides of time, mere footnotes in a history written by victors? My heart ached for her, for the anguish that twisted her features, a reminder that hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered. A sudden explosion shattered the air, a thunderous roar that sent ripples of panic through our ranks. The walls shook, and I grabbed Baldwin's arm just as the ground beneath us trembled. "We have to move," I shouted, urgency coursing through me. "Now!" We fought our way through the swirling chaos, the heat of the flames licking at our skin, the acrid smoke stinging our eyes. I could hear Baldwin's voice cutting through the din, rallying the men with a fervor I wished I could share. But my thoughts were consumed by Anna, the fear of losing her threading through my veins like poison. "Stay close!" I yelled, but the world around us had turned to madness, and I lost sight of her, the shadows swallowing her whole. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each heartbeat a drum echoing in the void. I stumbled through the wreckage, searching for her amidst the chaos, terror clawing at my throat. I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me, the realization that my love had become another casualty in this wretched siege. "Anna!" I called, voice cracking like glass, a desperate plea swallowed by the roar of war. The ground shook again, another explosion ripping through the air. I fell to my knees, hands clutching the dirt, my heart pounding against my ribcage, the world spinning around me like a whirlwind of despair. I remembered the dreams we had shared, a life beyond these walls, a home filled with laughter, a future bright with promise. But here, in this moment of terror, all that felt like ashes, slipping through my fingers. And then, amidst the chaos, I saw her, Anna, standing at the edge of the flames, her face illuminated by the fire, a spectre of hope amidst the despair. She was reaching for me, her hands outstretched, and I surged forward, desperate to close the distance. But the ground trembled again, and I felt the world shift beneath me. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward, but it was too late. The walls of Acre loomed above us, a monstrous giant that had finally begun to crumble, and in that moment, I realized the bitter truth: we were the architects of our own downfall. The mistakes of the past had caught up with us, and as the stones rained down, I felt the weight of my choices crushing me. Baldwin's voice broke through the haze, calling my name, but all I could hear was the heartbeat of the siege growing louder, a cacophony of despair that threatened to consume us all. Time warped and twisted, I was falling into darkness, the faces of those I loved flashing before my eyes. Their hopes, their dreams, all reduced to shadows in the flickering flames. As I fell, I grasped for memories, for the laughter of friends and the warmth of love, but all that surrounded me was chaos, the cost of our mistakes leaving an indelible mark upon my soul. In this moment, I understood the price of our ambition: nothing but ghosts and echoes would remain. Yet, even in the depths of despair, I felt something flicker, a glimmer of defiance, a stubborn refusal to be forgotten. Acre would fall, but we had lived, loved, fought, and in that, perhaps we would remain. Time would twist and turn, but our stories would linger in the shadows, forever echoing against the walls of history. And as the smoke rose to the heavens, I knew this was not the end. This was merely the beginning of a tale woven with pain and passion, a saga that would reverberate through the ages. The fog rolled in thick that day, a heavy blanket of silence draped over the battlefield of Falkirk, as if the earth itself held its breath, waiting for the steel and blood. I stood among my brothers, the chill biting at my skin, but nothing could compare to the dread curling around my heart. The sun had not yet made its ascent, casting the world in a surreal twilight, shadows dancing across the ground like spectres beckoning us to join them. I remember the laughter of the men, a desperate echo of camaraderie. We were warriors, yet beneath the bravado lurked fear, raw and unrefined. I could see it in their eyes, the flicker of uncertainty, the yearning for glory battling against the instinct to survive. I caught a glimpse of Andrew, his hands trembling as he gripped his sword, knuckles white. We had shared dreams over the flickering fire, dreams of a Scotland free, of a future where the weight of tyranny would no longer press down on our shoulders. But now, those dreams felt like ash in my mouth. "Glory awaits," Andrew had said, his voice a bright spark against the dim reality. Yet here we stood, the weight of that promise like a noose tightening around our necks. "Glory," I whispered, the word tasting bitter, like spoiled wine. What did it mean to be glorious? I remembered the stories of heroes, their names carved into the annals of time, echoes of valor ringing through the ages. Would they remember us? Or would we simply fade, like whispers in the dark? The clash of metal rang out, a grim prelude to the chaos that would soon envelop us. Archers lined the ridge, their bows drawn taut, arrows poised like venomous fangs ready to unleash despair. I felt a tremor ripple through the ground underfoot, a pulse that matched the thundering of my heart. Then, the horn blared, a jagged cry that sliced through the stillness, the signal to advance. And just like that, the air thickened with a sense of impending doom, the weight of 1,000 hopes crashing down upon us. The fog twisted and writhed as men surged forward, a tide of flesh and metal, their screams a symphony of desperation. I saw Ewan, a broad-shouldered giant, his laughter a constant in our camp. He was now a tempest of fury, charging into the fray with a battle cry that sent shivers down my spine. I could almost hear the echo of his laughter as he swung his axe, cleaving through flesh and bone, but the sound morphed into a horrifying roar that turned my stomach. The ghosts of our past hung around us, laughing and weeping, spectres of memories weaving through the chaos. Time twisted. Heartbeats stretched into eternity, and then collapsed into mere seconds. I remember the smell, the acrid stench of sweat, blood, and fear mixing in the air, a pungent reminder of what we fought against and what we fought for. In that moment, glory felt like a distant star, bright yet unreachable, flickering in a vast void. The ground turned slick beneath us, painting the earth in shades of crimson. I stumbled, my foot slipping on the lifeblood that soaked the soil, and for a heartbeat, I felt the weight of despair crash over me. Is this how it ends? I thought, panic clawing at my insides. I had come to fight for freedom, yet here I was, drowning in a nightmare I could not escape. And then Andrew was at my side, his face a mask of determination, the flicker of hope still alive in his eyes. We fight for each other, he bellowed, his voice cutting through the fog of terror. We fight for Scotland. I clung to that, the words wrapping around my heart like a lifeline. Yet, deep down, I sensed the fragility of that hope, like glass poised on the edge of a precipice. A shadow loomed over us, a dark figure emerging from the smoke. It was the enemy commander, his armor glinting in the scant light, a predator among sheep. His gaze fell upon us, cold and calculating, and I felt the chill of his malice seep into my bones. I wanted to scream, to run, yet my feet were rooted to the earth, tethered by the weight of those around me. Stand firm, brothers! Andrew shouted, but even his voice trembled, the crack in his resolve as clear as the sun breaking through the dawn. My heart raced, pounding in rhythm with the chaos, every beat echoing the dread that twisted within me. We were no longer soldiers, we were children caught in a storm, the wild winds of fate howling around us, threatening to tear us apart. We clashed again, the cold metal biting into flesh, the screams of the fallen echoing louder than the clang of swords. Ewan was there, fighting like a raging storm, but I could see it in his eyes, a flicker of doubt. He fought for survival, not glory. I reached for him, but the tide of bodies swept us apart, the world blurring into a cacophony of anguish and bloodlust. And then, as if time itself had conspired to mock us, I saw Andrew fall, his cry swallowed by the chaos, his body crumpling like a broken doll discarded amidst the wreckage. The sight pierced through the fog of battle, a jolt of icy despair. I lunged forward, but the weight of grief threatened to pull me under. Andrew! My voice broke, splintering into raw emotion, a desperate plea against the tide of death. I felt the world shift, the ground trembling beneath me once more. The beautiful dream of freedom had twisted into a nightmare, the taste of glory now a bitter void. The screams of the battlefield melded into a haunting chorus, the very air alive with the ghostly echoes of dreams shattered. I was lost, adrift in the chaos, my heart pounding an erratic rhythm, the thread of hope fraying with every breath. But it was not over. The yearning surged within me, a fierce, unrelenting fire igniting my spirit, pushing me forward into the darkness. Eyes wide with despair, I surged into the unknown, ready to confront the shadows, knowing that even in the depths of despair, the fight for our very souls had just begun. The battle raged on, and so did we, caught in the maw of destiny, a dance of survival, loss, and the flickering flame of what was once a dream. A chill wind swept across the fields of Crecy, carrying with it the scent of earth and blood, a promise of what was to come. I found myself standing there, frozen in the moment, the air thick with the weight of anticipation. It felt as if time itself held its breath, waiting, watching, a cosmic spectator to the unfolding tragedy. The sun hung low in the sky, a dying ember wreathed in shadows, casting elongated silhouettes of soldiers who clutched their weapons like lifelines. I remember the sounds, the distant clanging of armor, the muffled murmurs of men preparing for their impending doom. Fear and courage danced their macabre waltz in the hearts of the brave, and I could taste the metallic tang of inevitability on my lips. Raymond, a knight whose valor was matched only by his stubbornness, stood before his men, his face a mask of resolve. His hands, calloused and weathered like the very land they fought for, trembled ever so slightly as he gripped his sword, a family heirloom, as much a part of him as his own flesh. I could see the conflict in his eyes, a tempest of doubt battling against the fervor of honor. For France, he shouted, his voice ringing out like a clarion call, but even he could not silence the gnawing fear in his gut. The words felt hollow, a facade he wore like armor. He believed in the glory of battle, but deep down, he feared the loss that lay ahead. Beside him stood Alex, a young archer with dreams as wild as the wind. Her heart raced, not from the thrill of battle, but from the weight of her family, of her mother's tear-streaked face, of promises made in the quiet of night. I remember, she whispered to herself, invoking the ghost of her father who had fallen in another senseless war. How could she wield death when she had once held his hand, laughing under the stars? She narked an arrow, her fingers trembling against the smooth wood. Each heartbeat thundered in her chest, a metronome of dread that counted down to chaos. And then came the French cavalry, a sea of horses and men, their war cries crashing over the battlefield like waves upon a shore. I felt the ground tremble beneath them, a primal rhythm that echoed deep within my soul. They charged, a brilliant spectacle of valor and desperation, but in their hearts lurked a primal fear. This was not just a battle, it was a reckoning, a collective gasp of a nation facing its end. Raymond led them forward, his gaze fixed, but the chaos that unfolded felt surreal, as if time itself had distorted, bending and twisting into an absurdity only matched by the darkest of dreams. The English line, a wall of archers, stood firm, their longbows drawn like a taut string on the brink of release. I could see each face, young and old, hardened by the knowledge that they were the last stand against a storm. They were but men, yet they bore the weight of kingdoms upon their shoulders. The air crackled with tension, it was a moment suspended in time, each heartbeat a countdown to calamity. Then, as if commanded by fate itself, the arrows rained down, a deadly storm, a harbinger of despair. Raymond felt them pierce the sky, the thrum of death weaving through the air like a sinister melody. One by one, his men fell, their bodies taut and lifeless, the earth drinking in their blood. I could see the horror in his eyes as he realized the futility of their charge. "What have we done?" he roared, voice cracking under the weight of his own despair, but the words were lost amidst the cacophony of chaos. Alex stood rooted in place, each arrow that found its mark a stab to her very soul. She had dreamed of heroism, but this was the grotesque ballet of death. "I remember," she murmured over and over, the chant an anchor to her slipping sanity. With each flight of her arrows, she felt something shift inside her, the sweet scent of vengeance mingling with the acrid odor of fear. She knew she was a part of this, yet she felt like a ghost haunting the periphery of her own life. And then it happened. The moment that would forever fracture the dreams of the brave. A cacophony of screams erupted, drowning out the war cries. Horses reared and fell, men toppled like dominoes, each thud a cruel reminder that glory was nothing but a mirage. Raymond fell to his knees, sword slipping from his fingers, his spirit crumbling alongside his belief in honor. "What do we fight for?" he gasped, the question piercing deeper than any arrow. The ideals he had held sacred lay shattered like so many broken bodies around him. Alex, too, dropped her bow, her heart racing in time with the chaos. "I didn't want this," she cried into the storm, a plea lost to the winds. But the darkness of battle was relentless, a beast that devoured the very essence of humanity. She felt the echoes of her father's laughter, now drowned in the screams of the dying. The battlefield became a canvas of horror, painted with the blood of dreams, the cries of the fallen spiraling into the heavens. I stood there, a silent witness to the unraveling of fate, the threads of destiny fraying before my eyes. Each moment bled into the next, a horrifying loop of anguish that felt both endless and fleeting. Raymond, Alex, the soldiers, each heartbeat was a reminder that they were alive, yet surrounded by death. The world was collapsing, crumbling like the very soil beneath their feet, and within that chaos, the essence of humanity flickered like a candle in the wind. The battle was not just against the enemy, it was against despair, against the very nature of existence itself. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the battlefield cloaked in shadows, I felt the pulse of history echoing, a reminder that each life lost was a story untold, a soul unremembered, a charge into disaster that would haunt the annals of time. In that moment, I understood, this was not merely a struggle for victory, it was a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, flawed yet beautiful, forever intertwined with the pain and joy of existence. The air hung thick like a shroud, damp and heavy, pregnant with the weight of impending doom. The distant sound of hooves pounding the earth echoed through the valley, a heartbeat that quickened with every passing second. I felt it in my bones, that electric tension swirling around us, a prelude to chaos. The sun, a waning orb in a bruised sky, cast long shadows that danced like specters among the soldiers, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. This was Tewkesbury, the ground beneath us stained with the blood of past battles, and today would be no different. I remember the chill that travelled down my spine as I stood beside Edward, the Duke of York, his face a portrait of resolve and youthful arrogance. He was a lion ready to pounce, but today, he had made a miscalculation that could cost us everything. "We will crush them," he said, his voice booming, but the edge of doubt lingered in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I wanted to believe him, oh how I wanted to believe, but my heart was a stone, a heavy weight that sank deeper with every whispered word. And then there was Margaret, the queen of the Lancastrians, fierce and relentless. I caught a glimpse of her on a distant rise, her hair a wild mane, eyes ablaze with a fire that could consume kingdoms. She was not just a woman, she was a tempest, a storm brewed from grief and vengeance, determined to reclaim a crown that felt like a ghost slipping through her fingers. I felt for her, I really did. Her struggle was not just for survival, but for love, for a future that seemed as distant as the stars in the twilight sky. The irony twisted my gut. Here we were, on the brink of annihilation, and yet, in her fury, I recognized a flawed humanity. The battle for Tewkesbury wasn't just a fight for power, it was a desperate dance of dreams and nightmares. The Lancastrian forces, swollen with desperation, surged forward like a flood, their cries mingling with the clash of steel. I could hear Margaret's rallying cry, a beautiful madness that turned her soldiers into a tidal wave. But in that moment, I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes as she caught a glimpse of our ranks, a realization settling over her like a winter frost. The tension snapped, and chaos erupted. Arrows flew overhead like angry wasps, their whistling songs a harbinger of death. I ducked, my breath hitching in my throat, a sudden, visceral fear that clawed at my insides. I remember the moment vividly, as if the clock had stopped and I was trapped in a single heartbeat. The ground shook beneath us, the very earth trembling in anticipation of our fates. And there was Edward again, charging forward, a knight clad in blue and gold, handsome and young, yet so naive. I wanted to scream, to pull him back, to tell him that glory was an illusion, a mirage that vanished when you reached for it. But no words escaped my lips. I was paralyzed, torn between my loyalty and the nagging feeling that we were all pawns in a game far greater than ourselves. The clash was surreal, a cacophony of screams and metal that intertwined with the earthy scent of sweat and blood. I could feel the pulse of the battle echoing through me, each heartbeat a reminder that this was real, that we were alive, and yet so close to death. I had never before witnessed such raw intensity, the desperation painted on the faces of men fighting for their lives, and it twisted my heart like a knife. In the thick of it all, I spotted a soldier, a young boy barely a day past his 15th year, eyes wide with fear as he swung his sword. My soul ached for him, a fleeting image of innocence lost in an ocean of horror. He was one of them, one of Margaret's, and I wanted to scream at him to run, to flee from the madness that devoured us all. But the battle was relentless, and fear became a cruel master, chaining him to the blood-soaked ground. Then came the moment that felt suspended in time. Edward, in a frenzied rush, was struck, the horror painted across his face as he crumpled to the ground. I felt the world tilt, a violent shift that knocked the wind from my lungs. It was the miscalculation that had been creeping up on us, a shadow lurking in the corners of our overconfidence. The realization struck me like a thunderclap. This was the turning point, the moment where dreams turned to ash and hope fell like autumn leaves. Margaret's scream pierced through the chaos, raw and primal, echoing with a depth of loss that resonated with the very core of my being. It shattered the eerie calm that had settled over me, a reflection of the storm within her, a mother's anguish that transcended the battlefield. Her soldiers faltered, the tide of battle shifting, and I could feel the dread knotting my stomach. I remember the feeling of the earth beneath my feet, grounding yet threatening to swallow me whole. The ghosts of fallen warriors swirled around us, whispering tales of despair and valor. In that moment, I realized we were not merely soldiers, we were echoes of those who had fought before us, shadows of dreams unfulfilled. As the sun dipped lower, casting a bruised hue across the land, the battlefield transformed into a twisted theater, a place where triumph danced hand in hand with tragedy. Tewkesbury was a testament to miscalculations, to the fallibility of ambition. Each swing of the sword, each battle cry was a fleeting moment, a breath held tightly before the inevitable exhale of fate. The clash continued, frantic and unyielding. I felt the heartache of every soldier, the weight of 1,000 dreams crumbling into dust with every blow. In the chaos, I was merely a spectator, watching as the tapestry of our lives unraveled, thread by wretched thread. Time blurred, the past and future merging in a nightmarish swirl where hope was but a flickering candle in the dark. And as the sun set over Tewkesbury, the horizon awash with blood and despair, I could only watch, helpless, as the miscalculations of the Lancastrians unfolded, a tragic play that would echo through history. The battle was far from over, but the weight of what had already come to pass felt insurmountable, a heavy shroud draped over our souls. The real fight was not just for power, but for survival against the relentless tide of fate that threatened to consume us all, whispering secrets of loss and longing that would haunt us for eternity. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight hovering over the battlefield like a storm cloud, promising chaos. The distant rumble of hooves echoed in my chest, a war drum signaling the inevitable clash. I remember standing there, the frost of early morning biting at my exposed skin while my heart thundered in my ears. This was no ordinary day, this was the moment we had all been waiting for. Around me, the world was a cacophony of clanking armor and anxious whispers, soldiers clenching their weapons as if they were lifelines. I saw him, Edgar, my brother-in-arms and the bravest fool I knew. His eyes, a fierce blue, glinted with a mix of fear and defiance. He was half a man, half a legend. Just the week before, he had laughed in the face of death, boasting that the French would never see us coming. "They think they know us," he'd said, his voice bubbling with bravado, "but they have no idea what we're made of." But now, on the precipice of war, that bravado felt like a thin veneer over a deeper, more desperate fear. I remember looking at him, the way he fidgeted with the hilt of his sword, a nervous habit that betrayed his bravado. Behind him, the French banners fluttered like vultures, bold and arrogant, dismissing us as mere ants beneath their boots. They misjudged us, I thought. They thought we were nothing but shadows in the mist, easily crushed. But shadows can strike hard, especially when cornered. Then there was Claire, caught in the chaos of the encampment. A healer by trade, she was a fierce spirit wrapped in a fragile shell. I had seen her patch wounds and mend broken hearts, but today, her hands trembled as she gripped her herbs like a talisman against the horrors to come. "What if this is it?" she whispered to me, her voice a quiver of raw emotion. "What if we don't come back?" The question hung thick in the air, a ghost that refused to vanish. "Then we fight like we're already dead," I replied, attempting to inject strength into my voice, but deep down, I felt the truth gnawing at my gut. In that moment, I could almost taste the weight of history pressing down on us. The stakes were high, it was more than just a battle, it was a legacy. We were fighting not just for ourselves, but for every soul that had ever stood on this cursed ground. The French had underestimated the English spirit, mistaking our humility for weakness. But I knew better. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the field, the world grew quiet, as if time itself was holding its breath. The air vibrated with unspoken fears, hearts pounding like war drums in our chests. The silence before the storm, the calm before the chaos, it was intoxicating. I could feel the cosmos shifting, stars aligning in a way that felt both ominous and thrilling, as though the universe itself was setting the stage for our tragic play. Then, with a suddenness that clawed at my throat, the silence shattered. The French charged, a wave of color and fury, banners snapping like whips in the wind. Edgar, that reckless fool, was the first to leap into the fray, his sword raised high, a beacon of defiance. I followed, propelled by loyalty and fear, the thunder of our hearts drowned by the roar of battle. The world blurred into a storm of steel and sweat, a symphony of chaos where life hung by a thread. I fought like a man possessed, cutting my way through the tumult, each swing of my sword fueled by the desperate hope of survival. But in the madness, I lost sight of Edgar, that fierce blue gaze swallowed by the chaos. I cursed under my breath, my heart pounding with dread. Where was he? I promised I would protect him, and yet here I was, drowning in a sea of enemies. And then I saw her, Claire, her hands now stained with blood, moving among the wounded like a ghost. Fear rippled through me. "Stay back!" I screamed, my voice lost in the clattering din. But she was resolute, the fire in her eyes unyielding, a flame against the darkness. "They need me," she insisted, pulling bandages from her satchel, a warrior in her own right. The battle raged on, a cacophony of screams and the clash of metal, but within that chaos, I felt the tendrils of fate weaving tighter. Time warped, moments stretched like taffy, memories flooding in waves. I remembered our quiet evenings, laughter spilling like wine, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating her face. I remembered the dreams we shared beneath a tapestry of stars. But there was no time to dwell, the battle demanded my attention. I pushed through the chaos, my heart a drumbeat against the shadows. And then, in a moment that felt like an eternity, I found Edgar. He lay sprawled on the ground, the fierce blue of his eyes dulled. The very essence of my brother crumbled beside me, blood pooling like a dark promise at his side. No! I screamed, the word a roar wound in my throat. It was the sound of a heart breaking, a plea to the universe to rewind time, to grant me one last moment, one last laugh. But time is a cruel mistress, an unyielding force. I fell to my knees beside him, the world around me fading, the battle merely a backdrop to the agony in my chest. "I'm sorry," I gasped, my voice a whisper against the tide of chaos. "I'm so sorry." The weight of my failure bore down on me, a shroud of despair. All around us, the battle surged, but in that moment, it felt as if the universe had grown still. I could hear the pounding of my heart, a relentless reminder of the sorrow that would haunt me forever. The French may have misjudged our strength, but we had underestimated the cost of this war. As I cradled Edgar's lifeless form, I felt the cosmos shift once more, like a clock ticking in the background of our tragedy. The shadows stretched and twisted, as if reaching for something greater, a promise unfulfilled, a reckoning yet to come. The battle was far from over, and yet I stood at the edge of eternity, staring into the abyss we had unwittingly created. And then Claire was there, her hands trembling but steady, determined to bring light amid the darkness. "We fight for those we've lost," she said, her voice fierce, igniting a spark of hope within me. "We carry their memory into the heart of battle." Even as the struggle raged on, I felt the threads of fate intertwining, our lives woven into a tapestry of pain and purpose, of loss and love. The Battle of the Spurs was no longer just a clash of swords, it had become a manifestation of our very souls, a fight for redemption, for legacy, for the fragile dreams that still flickered in the shadows. The chaos surged around us, but somewhere beneath the din, I found the strength to rise. Together, we would face whatever came next. The French may have misjudged our resolve, but they would not extinguish our flame. The air crackled with tension, a living thing, as the sound of hooves thundered like a heartbeat against the earth. Battle cries pierced the mist, sharp and raw, each shout a declaration of life and death. I remember the chill in the air, how it wrapped around my bones like a shroud, whispering of the violence to come. The sun hung low, a blood-red eye, watching the chaos unfurl. Shadows danced between the trees, twisting and turning like the memories of those who would never return. William Wallace stood at the edge of the battlefield, his frame silhouetted against the rising dawn. I remember how the wind tousled his dark hair, wild and defiant. His eyes, fierce as a storm, reflected the burning rage of 1,000 wrongs. He was a man haunted by loss, each breath a reminder of what had been taken from him, the laughter of family, the warmth of friends, the peace of a life that seemed long lost as he fought for a future drenched in freedom. The English army loomed across the river, heavy armor glinting like a serpent's scales, and they thought themselves invincible, a great beast ready to crush the spirit of a nation. But Wallace saw through their arrogance, his mind racing with plans that defied the odds. "They are but a herd of cattle," he muttered under his breath, his voice steady, laced with a fierce determination that sent shivers down my spine. He was flawed, oh yes, a man driven by a fire that sometimes burned too bright. But in that very flaw lay his strength. He was a dreamer, a man who dared to believe that the impossible could be made real, and tonight, the cosmos held its breath, waiting. Then there was Andrew Murray, a man whose spirit was like a candle flickering against the storm. I remember the way he bit his lip as he surveyed the enemy lines, each breath a battle against his own doubts. He was loyal to a fault, bound to Wallace by a brotherhood forged in the fires of despair. But he carried a weight that threatened to crush him, a fear for his men, for their lives, for his own worthiness in this fight. As he glanced at Wallace, a pang of envy twisted in his gut. "What if we fail?" he whispered to himself, the words barely escaping his lips. But deep down, he knew that failure was a ghost he could not afford to entertain. The river, a silver ribbon of chaos, whispered secrets as it churned beneath the bridge. The English army, swollen with pride and arrogance, believed they had the advantage, their numbers a fortress. But Wallace, with a brilliance that shimmered like sunlight on steel, had drawn them in, lured them onto the narrow bridge, a trap set by a mind that danced with strategy. I remember the moment he raised his sword, the steel glinting, a beacon of hope amidst despair. Now, he roared, a sound that rippled through the air, igniting something primal in the hearts of his men. They surged forward, a tide of freedom crashing against the dam of tyranny. It was a beautiful chaos, a ballet of brutality and grace, each heartbeat echoing in time with the clash of steel. I could feel it, the raw energy, the desperate need for victory swirling around us, swallowing us whole. The English, caught in their own hubris, charged onto the bridge, their formation collapsing like a house of cards. They were a torrent of confusion, their arrogance becoming their undoing. I remember the screams, the horror, intertwined with the blood and mud that churned beneath our feet as the bridge became a graveyard of errors, a testament to their folly. The cries of the wounded echoed like a haunting melody, a symphony of anguish, and I could feel the weight of every soul lost in that moment. Then came the surge. Wallace, a force of nature, leaped into the fray, his sword an extension of his very being. I watched as he fought with a fury that could only be born from a heart that held the weight of countless dreams. Each swing of his blade was a whisper of hope, a prayer for those who had fallen, a declaration of war against despair. He was a man possessed, a warrior driven not just by vengeance but by the desire to carve a world where dreams could flourish and grow. Murray, too, found his courage, his doubts drowning beneath the roar of battle. He charged forward, a lion among sheep, the fear that had once paralyzed him now transformed into a fierce resolve. I remember the moment he locked eyes with Wallace amidst the chaos, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a promise forged in the heat of battle that they would not falter, that they would not break. The bridge trembled under the weight of bodies, and in that moment, I remember feeling the world tilt, time stretching thin like a tightrope. The cries morphed into a cacophony, a whirlwind of anguish and defiance, and I could hardly breathe, the air thick with the scent of sweat and blood. Each clash of metal resonated within me, a reminder of the stakes. The English fell, their ranks breaking apart like waves crashing against the rocks, and Wallace, with his eyes alight with the fire of rebellion, became a legend, an embodiment of resistance that would echo through the ages. But the battle was not without its cost. I remember the faces of the fallen, each one a flicker of light snuffed out too soon. Their stories, like whispers in the night, would linger on the edges of memory, haunting the corners of every heart that beat for freedom. As the dust settled and silence enveloped the battlefield, a haunting stillness took hold, reminding us all of the price of valor. Victory hung in the air, thick and heavy, but it felt bittersweet. I remember Wallace standing amidst the wreckage, his breath ragged, his heart pounding, a man weary from the weight of dreams yet to be fulfilled. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows lengthening, I knew this was only the beginning. A single battle fought, but a war that had just ignited, a fire that would consume all who dared stand against it. The echoes of Stirling Bridge would reverberate far beyond that day, an anthem for those who dared to hope, and the ghosts of the fallen would forever whisper their names in the winds of history. The air hangs thick with terror, a palpable weight that stifles breath and shrouds the mind in shadows. I can feel it, that heavy silence, punctuated only by the distant clashing of swords, a symphony of chaos, discord dancing on the edge of catastrophe. The city of Orleans, once a cradle of dreams, now trembles beneath the dark clouds of despair. Here, I stand, heart racing, pulse hammering, as if my very essence could somehow change the tide of this wretched battle. Joan, oh, Joan! The girl, barely a woman, yet brimming with a fire that could ignite the heavens. I remember the fervor in her eyes, bright as the morning star, undimmed by the muck of defeat. She strides forward, a flame in the heart of the storm, her battle cry piercing the murky gloom. God wills it! The words hang in the air, bold and unyielding, a lifeline thrown to the drowning. But amid her fierce resolve, doubt simmers. What does she know of war, of blood and sacrifice? Yet still, her conviction swells, pushing away the shadows that threaten to consume her. And then there's Etienne, a soldier caught in his own tempest. I see him, his weathered hands trembling around the hilt of his sword, as darting like a trapped animal. He's been forged in a furnace of despair, but now, doubt gnaws at his spirit like a ravenous pestilence. His heart is heavy with memories of lost brothers, their laughter replaced by the haunting echoes of their last breaths. "What am I fighting for?" he whispers, as if the question could shatter the very heavens. The city crumbles around him, and yet, he hesitates. I feel his fear, a dark pool deep within, threatening to swallow him whole. The battle rages on. I can almost taste the tang of blood and sweat on the air, feel the crunch of mud beneath my feet, slick with the residue of shattered dreams. In the distance, the English banners flutter like dark spectres, taunting, jeering, a mockery of hope. Joan's voice rises above the clamour, fierce and relentless, cutting through the despair like a blade through flesh. "Advance! For France! For our people!" She moves, and we move with her, drawn in by the gravity of her spirit. But there's a moment, a heartbeat suspended in time, where all seems lost. Etienne watches as a comrade falls, a ghost of what he once was, and his heart stammers in his chest. "I can't," he mutters, the words a fragile whisper of surrender. "I can't do this." The weight of despair is suffocating, pressing down like the looming sky. And yet Joan stands before him, fierce and unyielding, the embodiment of hope and determination. "You can. We fight not for ourselves, but for those who cannot. For the children, for the future." I feel the tremor in her voice, the deep well of conviction that spills forth like a raging river, forcing its way through the cracks of fear. But will it be enough? The air crackles with a strange energy, as if the very universe is holding its breath, waiting for a spark to ignite the world around them. Then strikes a moment of clarity, a fleeting understanding that binds them both, Joan and Etienne, two souls colliding in the crucible of chaos. "I remember," he says, the words tumbling out, raw and painfully honest. "I remember the laughter of my son, the way his eyes lit up at the sight of the stars." And in that instant, the weight of the world shifts. Joan's gaze softens, the fire in her heart igniting something in him, a flicker of hope. "Then fight for him," she implores, her voice a melody of defiance. And just like that, the tide begins to turn. The clash of swords grows louder, the cries of the wounded become a battle hymn, and for the first time, I feel the air crackling with a sense of purpose, an electric charge coursing through the thrumming veins of the city. I can see it, a glimmer of change, a stirring in the hearts of men who had long been silenced by fear. Hope unfurls like a banner in the storm. In those fleeting moments, the fog of disarray lifts, revealing a battlefield transformed. Sweat mingles with tears, the scent of earth and iron hangs heavy, but now there's something more tangible, resilience. Joan moves like a spectre of fate, a beacon of light, her laughter ringing clear, cutting through the clamor, a rallying cry for a fractured nation. Onward, she commands, and the word becomes a spell, an incantation that binds them together, a promise that whispers of a dawn yet to come. Etienne, emboldened by her spirit, raises his sword high, and for the first time, he feels the weight of his fear lift, replaced by something far more potent, our belief. The very air vibrates with their collective resolve, a seismic shift in the heart of despair. But shadows linger, lurking just beyond the periphery, as if the ghosts of the fallen watch, waiting for their hour to claim retribution. I sense it, a chill that crawls up my spine, as if death itself is breathing down our necks, eager to snatch away this fragile victory. And yet, they fight. The clash and clangor of steel rings out, a chaotic symphony of desperation and valor. Joan, fierce and unyielding, presses forward, and Etienne follows, buoyed by the dream of a future where laughter echoes once more beneath the stars. In the heart of this swirling maelstrom, as courage and fear entwine, I feel it, a pulse, a heartbeat, that echoes through the very fabric of time. The battle rages on, and I stand, breathless, at the edge of history, knowing that we are all woven into this tapestry of hope and despair, where every thread tells a story that is far from over, even as the sun begins to rise, casting a golden glow upon the blood-soaked earth. Thunder rumbled like an angry beast in the sky, drowning the distant cries of warriors, drowning everything, until all that remained was the throbbing pulse of fear. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs with the urgency of 1,000 drums, surrounded by the chaos of the Battle of Curlan. The air was dense with the metallic scent of blood, mingling with dust kicked up by hooves, hooves of horses galloping toward their destiny, riders gripping swords as if they were the very fabric of existence, ready to cut through the strands of fate. I remember the moment when Arik, my brother, clutched my arm, his eyes wide with terror, a stark contrast to the fire of ambition that usually burned within him. "We cannot lose this," he shouted, his voice piercing through the cacophony like an arrow. But I saw the tremor of his hands, felt the weight of doubt pressing down on him, choking the fervor he once had. We were Mongols, proud and fierce, but today, here at the banks of the Kurlan River, that pride felt like a yoke around our necks. The Jin forces were a tide of steel and ferocity, closing in around us, their banners snapping like the wings of crows in a storm. I felt a chill, a premonition that coiled around my spine. They were not just men, they were shadows of the past, ghosts of those whom we had underestimated, and now they rose to reclaim their place in the world, ready to exact vengeance. I remember Chagan, our commander, standing atop a hill, a figure cloaked in desperation, his voice booming across the battlefield. For the Khan! For honor! But even he must have felt the gnawing fear at the edge of his resolve. A commander without faith is a candle flickering in the wind, fragile, ready to be snuffed out. A scream, sharp and cutting, sliced through the air. My heart lurched as I turned, the chaos momentarily quieting around me as I recognized the sound. It was Zern, my childhood friend, a fierce warrior who fought with the spirit of 1,000 eagles. I had watched him grow, a bundle of laughter and dreams, now reduced to a figure crumpling against a tree, the life draining from his eyes. It wasn't just a loss, it was a knife twisted deep in my soul. I remember racing to him, but the world blurred, the ground beneath my feet turned to treacle, dragging me down. "Zeren!" I cried, but his lips were moving, forming words that tasted of ashes. "Don't!" he gasped, "don't let them take our land. Promise me!" And there it was, a weight that plunged through my chest, a promise that felt as heavy as the sky above us, dark and swirling. I wanted to scream that I would fight, that I would claw our way to victory, but I understood then that promises made in the throes of battle often evaporate like morning mist. The wind howled, whipping through the grasses, carrying the screams of men, the clashing of swords, and the cries of horses. Each sound echoed against the horizon, a dreadful symphony heralding our doom. I turned back to Arik, who had become a spectre of his former self, a rage burning in the recesses of his eyes. "We can't stop. We won't lose," he yelled, but beneath his bravado lay a boy frightened of shadows, terrified of the truth that loomed above us like an executioner's blade. And then it happened, the thunderous charge. The Jin forces surged forward, a dark wave crashing against the feeble defenses we had erected. I saw Chagan's face pale as he realized the tide was not turning in our favor. I saw the flicker of terror in Arik's eyes as he was swept away in the torrent of bodies, swords biting into flesh, screams melding into a grotesque chorus of despair. It felt surreal, a nightmare crafted from frantic thoughts. I was swept into the maelstrom, flung into the chaos as I fought to hold onto my sanity, my humanity. Each swing of my sword felt more like a dance with death rather than an act of valor. I was surrounded by shadows, faces twisted in agony, eyes wide with terror, the stench of sweat and blood choking me. And somewhere amidst the frenzy, I caught a glimpse of Zern's face, flickering like a dying ember in my memory, a reminder of everything worth fighting for, everything I could lose. The earth trembled beneath our feet, a reminder of our mortality, our fleeting moments. I remember moments of clarity piercing through the haze, the reflection of a blade catching the dying sun, the frantic beat of my heart pounding against the encroaching darkness. Time warped, became a cruel illusion, and I thought of dreams, dreams of home, of families waiting, of hope wrapped up in the mundane. But here, all those dreams became a weight, a chain pulling us into the abyss. And then, silence. A terrible, suffocating hush fell across the battlefield, broken only by the ragged breaths of the dying. I fell to my knees, the ground slick beneath me, everything lost, the remnants of my brother's courage slipping through my fingers like sand. I felt the cold grip of despair wrapping around my heart, squeezing until I could hardly breathe. As I looked at the shadows of comrades fallen, I realized the truth. In this battle, the real tragedy lay not in the loss of the fight but in the quiet horror of what we had become. We were no longer men but ghosts wandering through a graveyard of dreams, each one a reminder of what it meant to be mortal, fragile, and irrevocably flawed. The battle raged on, and I found myself back on my feet, driven by something primal, something desperate. The taste of blood filled my mouth, but I fought against the tide, against the encroaching dark. I was not ready to vanish into the night, not while my brother's promise echoed in my ears, not while the shadows still beckoned. And just like that, the chaos resumed, the tide swirling again as I pushed forward, chasing the flickering flame of hope amidst the despair. The battle at Curlan was not just a clash of swords, it was an unrelenting tide of emotion, each heartbeat a reminder that we existed, that we fought, that we lived, even on the edge of oblivion. In the end, all we had was the fight, the pure, raw, unyielding fight. The cold air hangs thick with the scent of sweat and iron, and somewhere in the distance, the earth trembles under the weight of marching boots, thousands of them. I can hear it. The rhythmic thud of destiny drawing closer with every heartbeat, and my heart dances like a wild thing, caught between fear and anticipation. I remember the chill that ran down my spine as the banners fluttered, the colors a stark, defiant contrast to the dull grey sky above. The Habsburgs were coming, eager to crush the spirit of a people who dared to stand against them. I see them, my brothers in arms, faces etched with determination and uncertainty. Hans, a farmer turned soldier, clutches his sword as if it were the last remnant of his former life, the fields now a fading memory. His hands tremble, not from the cold, but from an unspoken terror. What if I fail? I hear him whisper, and it stabs at my heart, for I share his fear. The weight of our rebellion rests heavy upon us, the burden of hope mingling with the crushing inevitability of loss. Then there's Greta, a woman forged from the iron of her ancestors, standing on the outskirts of our makeshift camp. Her eyes are fierce, ablaze with a strange fire that both terrifies and mesmerizes me. She carries a resolve that seems almost otherworldly, a quality that pulls the very essence of courage from the depths of our souls. We fight for freedom, she says, and I can feel the raw power of her conviction pulse through the air, igniting something deep within us. But even she shivers, a small tremor breaking her fierce facade, and in that moment, I see her vulnerability, her dreams of a future snatched from the jaws of despair. The silence before battle is deafening, punctuated only by the distant echo of war drums and the crackle of anxiety. I remember the stories of past heroes, told by firesides, heroes who fought not just for land, but for legacy, for honor. The ghosts of those tales swirl around us like a fog, whispering promises of glory and the inevitable price of our defiance. I wonder if they knew fear, too, if the weight of their choices pressed against their chests like a heavy stone. As the sun begins to sink, painting the world in shades of crimson and gold, the tension stretches taut like a bowstring ready to snap. I can almost taste the metal in the air, sweet and sour, a reminder that blood will flow. Then, with a jarring crack, the moment explodes, war horns blare, shattering the stillness, and time seems to hold its breath. We surge forward, a human tide, hearts pounding in a cacophony of fear and adrenaline. I glimpse Hans again, his face transformed, the farmer now a warrior, eyes ablaze with the fire of determination. For our home, he cries, a battle cry that rises above the din, igniting a spark in each of us. We charge, an indomitable wave ready to crash against the might of Habsburg steel, and as I draw my sword, it feels alive, pulsating with the rhythm of the fight. The clash of metal rings in my ears, a jarring symphony of strikes and shouts. I can feel the weight of the world pressing down, the echoes of my ancestors urging us onward, and I close my eyes for just a moment, long enough to remember the faces of those who believed in this fight, those who had fallen before us, the ghosts of Sempark standing beside us, guiding our actions. But there is no time for sentiment. I open my eyes to chaos, a whirlpool of bodies, the ground slick with mud and blood, the air thick with screams and the metallic tang of fear. I see Greta, her sword moving with a grace that belies the brutality of the moment, fighting not just for survival, but for the dream of a land unshackled. My heart swells with pride and an inexplicable ache. Fight! I scream, my voice mingling with the roar of battle, a plea, a command, a prayer. The Habsburg forces are a storm, but we are the lightning, striking back with ferocity. I can feel the swell of hope rising within me, even as fear grips my throat. Hans fights beside me, his face a mask of grim determination and raw panic, and as we clash against our foes, I glimpse the fragility of our existence. Time stretches, a taut string, each second a lifetime, each breath a testament to the will to endure. The dance of death is brutal, and I can hear the whispers of the past, urging us to fight harder, to remember why we are here. And then I see it. A figure in the chaos, an enemy knight, towering and fierce, eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. The unmistakable emblem of Habsburg emblazoned on his armor, a mark of oppression. He swings his sword, a flash of steel that threatens to plunge me into darkness, but I'm not ready to surrender to that fate. I remember the faces of my friends, their hopes tangled with mine, and suddenly I'm not just fighting for me, I'm fighting for every heart that beats for freedom. With a surge of fury, I clash against the knight, our swords meeting with a furious reverberation that sends shockwaves through my arm. The fury of the battle blurs the lines between fear and exhilaration. I can taste the grit of resolve on my tongue, the bitterness of sweat and blood mixing with the salt of tears. I am alive, and in this moment, I will not falter. The knight counters, and I duck, narrowly avoiding a blow that would have ended my fight. I roll, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and in that split second, I see Hans across the field, locked in a desperate struggle of his own. I want to shout, to urge him to keep going, but the words catch in my throat. Instead, I push back against my own enemy, the dance of life and death spiraling closer, the weight of our choices hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. And then I hear it, Greta's war cry, fierce and raw, cutting through the cacophony like a beacon. I catch a glimpse of her, a whirlwind of energy, and in that moment, I understand. This battle is not just a clash of swords, it is a manifestation of our deepest selves, our longing for something greater than this existence. We are not just fighting for land, we are fighting for our souls. Our blades clash, and I feel the energy shift, the tide of battle turning as Hans takes down another foe, his victory echoed in the shouts of my companions. The Habsburg forces begin to waver, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. I can feel it, the fragile thread of hope that we've woven from our shared resolve, binding us together in this wild maelstrom of chaos. I remember the dreams we had, the stories whispered around fires, and the unyielding belief that together we could forge a new path. In the midst of this storm, I grasp that dream, that hope, and pull it close, letting it fuel my every move. Each swing of my sword becomes a declaration, a pledge to never let our spirits be extinguished. And so, as the battle rages on, with blood and sweat soaking the earth beneath our feet, I know that we fight not just for victory, but for the very essence of who we are. In this moment, the world expands, the cosmos spins on its axis, and time loses its grip. We are more than mere mortals, we are the heartbeat of history, the pulse of change, and we will not be forgotten. The sun hung low, a blood-red orb bleeding into the horizon, as the air crackled with tension, heavy with the scent of sweat and fear mingled like a dark potion brewing. I remember the crunch of dry grass beneath my boots, each step echoing the heartbeat of a land caught in the throes of despair. It was a battlefield, but there was no glory here, only the stench of mortality, wrapping around me like a second skin. I breathed it in, the metallic tang of blood, the whispers of ghosts long silenced, and in that moment, every heartbeat felt like a countdown to oblivion. Richard III stood at the precipice of the end, a king stripped of his crown but clutching desperately to the remnants of his dignity. His pale face, etched with lines that told stories of ambition, betrayal, and a fierce love for a kingdom that slipped through his fingers, was a mask of anguish. I remember the way he clenched his fists, the knuckles white as if he could physically hold onto the fleeting moment of power he knew would shatter like glass the moment the first blade struck. "My kingdom for a horse," he muttered, a twisted echo of desperation that hung heavy in the air. I wanted to laugh, but the absurdity suffocated me. Here was a man who had gambled everything, and now the stakes felt like the weight of the world. Then there was Henry Tudor, the challenger, emerging from the shadows of history like a ghost himself, his heart pounding with the fervor of a man who dared to dream of a crown. "This is it," he seemed to whisper to himself, his breath quickening, his pulse pounding like a drum. I felt the swell of his hope, a fragile, flickering flame in the dark night, fueled by the blood of the fallen. He was flawed, just like Richard, his ambition was tinged with a haunting fear. What if he failed? What if he became the very monster he sought to overthrow? But standing there, he was a beacon, a flicker of light in the encroaching darkness that threatened to swallow them both whole. And then there was loyalty, the bittersweet taste of a promise made, unbroken yet heavy with sacrifice. Lord Stanley hovered on the edge of the fray, torn between blood and duty. I could feel the weight of his indecision, the shudder that rippled through his veins. What is a man if he cannot protect his own, he pondered, a thought that twisted like a knife in his gut. In the chaos, he wore the mask of a loyal servant, but inside, his heart was a tempest, battling the tempest of loyalty and his own survival. Each pulse of his heart screamed for clarity, but the battle before him was too chaotic, a dance of death, where every choice carved a fate, where every silence held a scream. The clash of swords sliced through the air, a symphony of chaos, and I felt my own heart race, each beat syncing with the rhythm of war. The screams of men fell like rain, the ground drank deeply, quenching its thirst with the life's essence of warriors lost. I remember the faces, ghosts that shuffled across the battlefield, marionettes of despair and courage, their stories unfinished, lost in the swell of history. There was no time to mourn. There was only the present, a moment stretched to eternity, as time itself seemed to fracture under the weight of destiny. Do you feel it? Richard roared, his voice a primal cry that cut through the din. Do you feel the ground shifting beneath you? This is not just a battle, this is the future, our future. The echo of his desperation resonated with the soldiers around him, a call to arms, to blood, to the bitter end. But I could see it in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, a crack in the facade that said he was losing grip not just of the battle but of everything he'd fought for. His crown was heavy, a lead weight resting on his brow, and I could feel the yearning for redemption pulsing through him, a desire to rewrite history in the final moments of his reign. Henry, sensing the shift, launched himself forward, a comet burning through the night sky, his heart a roaring flame of purpose. For the people, he cried, his voice lifting the spirits of those around him, igniting the very air with a promise of hope. Yet, behind that fire, I felt the spectre of doubt loom large. What if he was not the savior they thought? What if the dream he chased was merely a mirage, leading them to their doom? But he pressed on, the embodiment of ambition and fear, rising and falling with the tide of battle. And then came the moment, a collision of fate and choices, where every decision felt like a weight on scales tipped toward despair. Steel met steel, and the world around me blurred into a chaotic swirl of color and sound, the cacophony of war becoming a haunting lullaby. I could see Richard, wild-eyed and desperate, his sword slicing through the air, striking down friend and foe alike in a frenzy of survival. But the tide was turning, the shadows of defeat creeping closer as Henry's forces surged forward, and I could taste the bitter bile of loss rising in my throat. The final moment stretched like an unwound clock, ticking toward the inevitable. Richard, once proud, now bloodied and weary, felt the eyes of fate upon him. Is this how it ends? He whispered to the chilling winds, his breath mingling with the cries of the dying. A king with no kingdom, a ruler with no reign. He fought with everything left in him, heart racing, but the world was closing in, and with every strike, he felt the fragments of his legacy slipping away. And in that fleeting instant, I could see it all, the heartache, the betrayal, the heavy cost of ambition. The battle raged on, a storm of chaos and clarity, and as Richard fell, the weight of his decisions hung in the air like a ghost, a reminder that power is fleeting, that fate is a cruel mistress. I felt it then, that eternal truth, echoing through the ages, pulsing through my veins as the final curtain of night fell, wrapping the battlefield in its shroud. Ghosts lingered, stories untold, as the dawn approached, but for Richard and Henry, the battle was far from over. The echoes of their choices would linger forever, haunting the land with the weight of their fateful decisions. The air hung heavy with dread, thick as the fog that wrapped around the German army like a shroud. It was no ordinary march across the unforgiving lands of the East. This was a desperate journey, a pilgrimage stained in the blood of fallen comrades and haunted by the specters of dreams unfulfilled. Men clutched their swords tightly, their knuckles white, as if the steel itself could fend off the shadows clawing at their minds. I remember the moment it struck me, this chilling realization, we were not only marching toward Jerusalem, we were stumbling into a graveyard of hopes. I stood beside Heinrich, a man whose heart beat not just for glory but for the memory of his son. With every step, I could see the pain etched on his brow, each furrow a reminder of the boy he'd lost to sickness, the sweet laughter now drowned beneath the weight of his father's failure. "I should have saved him," he muttered, teeth clenched, eyes wild with agony. The guilt wrapped around him like a serpent, squeezing tighter with every whispered prayer for salvation that went unanswered. I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of madness, the question that nagged at him, would the blood of others wash away his shame? Then there was Gertrude. Fierce and unyielding, she wielded her sword like a beacon in the fog, a warrior among men but fighting battles of her own. I admired her, even as I felt the ache in her heart, the unspoken longing for her brother lost to some war before this one had even begun. With every clash of steel, I sensed her fierce determination to prove herself, to be more than a woman among men. Yet it was that very fire that threatened to consume her. I could see it in the way her hands trembled, the way her breath caught in her throat whenever the night fell silent, revealing the ghosts of the past that danced on the edges of her dreams. "Forward! We must push through." The command shattered the eerie quiet, and with it, the fragile resolve of the men around us. Our feet, once strong and certain, now dragged through the muck of despair. The mud swallowed our boots, each step a reminder that we were not the conquerors we had envisioned, merely lost souls caught in a storm of history with no sight of the shore. I remember the night the rain came, an unrelenting downpour that drummed against our tents and soaked our spirits. The sound of sorrow echoed beneath the weight of the heavens, a symphony of despair. Heinrich sat beside me, eyes lost in the flickering shadows of the fire, his face a mask of anguish. "What if this is all for nothing?" he whispered, fear inching into his voice. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him that the banners would wave proudly over Jerusalem, that his son's spirit would smile down upon him from the heavens. But the truth clawed at my throat, a bitter pill I could not swallow. The war had long since become a tale of blood and betrayal, a grotesque dance that demanded sacrifices too great to fathom. The dream of glory felt like a distant memory, fading like the embers of the fire that flickered before us. The following day, as we pressed on, I caught sight of Gertrude at the front lines. She swung her sword, a whirlwind of fury and sadness, and for a moment, I was entranced. She was a tempest in a world that demanded stillness, her battle cry echoing against the backdrop of despair. But then her eyes flicked to a shadow moving through the trees, something unnatural, a flicker of fear that spoke louder than her bravado. "Stay sharp," she barked, a note of panic threading through her command as she turned, steel glinting in the murky light. I felt adrenaline surge, a jolt that electrified the air around us. Was it a thief? A spy? Or specters of our own making, memories creeping back to remind us of the inevitable price we would pay? But in that moment of tension, the world seemed to slow, as if time held its breath. I could feel the weight of the silence, vast and unyielding, as we collectively waited for the storm to break. The sound of our own hearts pounded in my ears, each beat a reminder of our mortality, each gasp a plea for forgiveness. And then it happened. A flash, a cry, a shattering of peace. The shadow materialized, and in an instant, chaos erupted. The clash of metal rang out like thunder, the screams of men echoed across the battlefield, drowning out the last vestiges of hope. I found myself standing beside Heinrich, our breath mingling, fear knitting us together as the reality of our comrade's fragility unfolded before us. "Fight! Fight for your lives," he yelled, but I could see the despair dawning in his eyes as if he were already mourning the loss of everything he had fought for. In that moment, I realized we were united not by glory but by vulnerability, each of us carrying the weight of our own failures, our own ghosts that whispered cruel truths in the dark. As the day wore on, shadows stretched long and twisted, distorting our forms into grotesque parodies of the warriors we had hoped to be. The ground was slick with the remnants of dreams, a morbid tapestry of history weaving itself into our skin. I felt the cold grip of despair wrap around me, pulling me deeper into the abyss. I remember Gertrude's scream, piercing through the cacophony, a sound that shattered my very soul. I turned, and in the chaos, I caught a glimpse of her, bloodied, fallen, a warrior brought low by the very shadows she had fought so bravely against. And in that moment, time itself fractured, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind as I rushed towards her, despair clawing at my heart. But I could not save her. None of us could escape the relentless march of fate. We were but pawns in a game played by gods indifferent to our suffering, trapped in a cycle of blood and betrayal beneath a sky that did not care whether we hoped or despaired. As darkness descended, the cries of the fallen echoed in my ears, a haunting melody that would linger long after the battlefield fell silent. The march continued, a haunting procession of loss and longing, and the horizon stretched endlessly, mocking our dreams, reminding us that our journey had only just begun. The air crackled with tension, a taut string pulled to its limit, waiting for the inevitable snap. Dust swirled under a sun that felt almost too heavy to bear, the shimmering heat distorting the horizon. I could see them, the Romans, stoic faces, hardened by years of war, glinting armor that caught the sun and reflected their resolve. But it wasn't the glint of steel that chilled my spine, it was the fear etched into their eyes. I stood among them, a ghost among the living, my heart pounding in time with the thud of distant hooves, the sound of dread marching toward us. Hannibal Barca, the man whose name instilled terror across the ancient world, stared out at the horizon, his expression a storm of contemplation and fury. I could see him, a titan among men, yet weighed down by the ghosts of past decisions, of battles lost and opportunities missed. His thoughts flickered like shadows on a flickering candle, racing between the glories of his triumphs and the crushing weight of his failures. I remember the stories, the tales whispered by firesides, legends of a man who crossed the Alps with elephants, who laughed in the face of Roman might. But here he was, at Zama, uncertain, painted with doubt, a king in rags, surrounded by the spectre of defeat. And then there was Scipio Africanus, the young general, a firebrand of ambition wrapped in the cloak of duty. His fingers curled around the hilt of his sword, knuckles white with the strain of his resolve. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his gaze, a fleeting moment that echoed through the air. He carried the weight of his city on his shoulders, of Rome's legacy, of a republic that had clawed its way through decades of bloodshed. The clock was ticking, and in that moment, he was not just a general, he was the heartbeat of a nation poised on the precipice of destiny. I remember the stories told about him too, how he wept for his soldiers, how he laughed in the face of gods. But here, at Zama, in this suffocating silence, he wrestled with the terrifying truth: victory could slip through his fingers like sand. The tension was palpable, it wrapped around us like a noose, tightening with every heartbeat. The wind carried whispers of dread, tales of vengeance, and the acrid scent of despair. I felt it, a heavy weight lodged in my throat, the unspoken fears of the men on either side. Each Roman stood with a heart full of hope yet haunted by the spectre of defeat. Each Carthaginian soldier bore the weight of his commander's ambition, driven by dreams that flickered in the fading light of their hopes. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the battered earth, I could hear the murmurs of the soldiers, a chorus of doubt and determination. They clutched their weapons, trembling with the need to fight, yet yearning for a sliver of peace. I remember the faces, young men, old men, men who had seen too much. The ghost of a child brushed past my consciousness. I saw their mothers, their families waiting in homes that felt like distant memories. And then the moment arrived, the stillness shattered by the clash of metal, the cries of men, and the desperate roar of battle. It was chaos, an awful symphony of violence, where every swing of a sword could mean life or death. I lost myself in the frenzy, the frantic rhythm of bodies colliding, of blood staining the earth, of the raw, visceral energy of survival. Hannibal fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast, every blow he struck a reminder of his legacy. But there was a hesitation, a moment of doubt that flickered behind his fierce eyes. I could see him battling not just the Romans, but his own ghosts, his past victories taunting him like a chorus of lost dreams. The weight of history pressed upon him, a chain of his own making, and in that moment, he faltered. Scipio, too, found himself locked in a desperate dance. He surged forward, a tide against the crashing waves of despair, but in the chaos, I saw him stumble. His breath came heavy, a reminder of the stakes. They weren't just fighting for victory but for the very soul of their city. I remember the raw desperation, a soldier, a leader, a man caught between glory and oblivion. The battle raged on, and I felt the pulse of the earth beneath me, a heartbeat echoing the struggle of men fighting for their dreams, for their homes, for the very essence of who they were. It was a dance of life and death, a macabre waltz where every misstep could lead to ruin. Then, amidst the carnage, a moment crystallized, Hannibal's eyes locked onto Scipio's, a soul-to-soul connection that transcended the chaos around them. In that brief moment, they were no longer enemies. They were two men, burdened by dreams that felt too large for their hearts, wrestling with the enormity of fate. I could feel their breaths, the weight of their desires, Hannibal, yearning for redemption, Scipio, desperate to become legend. But the moment shattered as swiftly as it had formed, the battle crashing back into chaos, the cries of the dying drowning out their silent plea for understanding. The ground soaked with the blood of men who had dreams just like mine, desires that echoed across time, their stories lost to the winds of history. And in that silence after the storm, as the dust settled and the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt the bitter taste of fate linger in the air. It was a haunting realization, the ghosts of what could have been, the weight of choices unmade. The battleground fell silent, but the echoes of their struggle would resonate through the ages, a reminder of the frailty of ambition, the tragedy of dreams unfulfilled. I remember, time did not stop, it merely shifted, the clock ticking onward, carrying with it the remnants of a battle, of men who fought not just with swords but with their very souls. And as I stood there, amidst the remnants of despair and fleeting hope, I could feel the weight of their stories pressing down on me, a haunting melody that refused to fade. The battle was lost and won, yet the war for legacy, for meaning, would echo endlessly into the twilight.